So welcome to this session of the Salon of Classical Architecture. This is the sixth session in our 12 weeks program. And today we're going to talk about elevations in special buildings and then the usual question time and project critique for those of you who want to bring your project for free. So as you see, we are in the half of the program of resources and tools in classical architecture, which is sponsored by the Classic Planning Institute as part of our broad endeavor of giving free content and free quality content for everyone. I would ask everyone to mute yourselves so that we prevent any problem with background noise, but please unmute yourself whenever you want to have a question, etc. As you will see, I have divided the session in several sections, so there will be time for stops to ask questions, and we always have the final time. So last week we talked about cityscape. We talked about the common buildings that make the urban fabric. But today we're going to talk about the special buildings. Those are special buildings that also makes cities unique, and those special buildings who makes landmarks in the city. So in that regard, I have divided into 8 different type of buildings. They could be more, they could be less, but this is the division I came with to make a clear distinction between the functions. The first one is going to be palaces, because the architecture of the elites and the rulers has always been very important for the structure of the city. Government and public buildings, which also make a very important contribution to the city. Churches and cathedrals, of course, because of the importance of religion through the ages, and Christianity in particular in Western Europe and the Americas. Libraries, which despite being a very old thing that has always existed, it only became a proper typology recently. Museums, which we have the same. Markets, hospitals, and commercial buildings. So we're going to see the length of the parts vary. So some parts will be longer than others, but I hope that you will enjoy all of them. So we're starting with palaces. And remember, this is about classical architecture. So I am deliberately omitting a lot of other architecture. Well, one of the things that we don't have clear at all is how the facade of of Roman palaces and any palace in antiquity looked like. But one thing that we know, it was part of apparently a Roman palace, and one of the structures that has been surviving up until the Renaissance was the so-called the Septisodium in Rome. We know that it was more like a fountain, but it was probably giving an infeum, which is basically a fountain, but there was something somehow related to a palace or the end of an aqueduct. And I wanted to bring it here because it's one of the examples of the stacking of the orders that was a very, very heavy impact in classical antiquity. Our next stop, this is going to be like a timeline stop, is the Royal Alcazar in Sevilla, which I am bringing as an exception to the rule of bringing only neoclassical buildings. And one of the reasons why I am building it is not only the little colonnettes that you can see there that has classical remembrance. I want you to take a look at these brick piers on the side. These brick piers at that specific size because apparently, or that's what the tradition says, is that the 2 Roman columns were going to be placed either side of the facade. And there were 2 Roman columns coming from these remains temple that are in the city center of Sevilla, like I would say the 500, 600 meters from the Alcazar, but through a very, very narrow network of streets. There were 6 columns of a Roman temple that we don't know much about. We know for the height of the shaft and the bases that probably they were Corinthian columns. And they tried to bring one as an experiment to there, but it crashed, and then they decided not to bring anymore. But at least 2 of them ended up being part of what it is now called the Alameda de Hércules in Sevilla, which is like a massive public square to the west of the city, quite lively and beautiful to visit if you go to the city of Sevilla. Without moving to Spain, I wanted to put some notes, some interest in the palace of Charles V in Granada, because this is a mannerism before mannerism. It is thought that the architect called Pedro Machuca started to build in 1525, more or less at the same time that Giulio Romano was starting to define a new way of doing things in the Palazzo Te in Mantua. So what we know is that Machuca was coming from Italy, was a Spanish that had been trained in Italy, and when he came back to Spain, the emperor commissioned him to design this palace attached to the Alhambra, and that in the long term was what saved the whole Alhambra from destruction. I mean, he had to destroy a portion of the palaces to build this, but in order to, that contributed to preserve the whole thing. And one of the things that I want you to bring here is the heavy use of the rusticated ground floor as a way of enhancing the ground floor of a building. It's always a rustication. It's a great method that works both as an order and as a pedestal. And then, of course, we have the second order over pedestals, very beautiful. And then the difference or the stacking of pediments, of windows with pediments and without pediments, the massive Serliana in the center, and the stacking of Ionic over Corinthian. And of course, for those of you who know, the amazingly round courtyard, that it's very unique in terms of architecture. And then you can see to the left, you can see a bit of the courtyard of the Rajanes, and here the courtyard of the Lions. So it just sits on top of the Alhambra. We can see here a glimpse of the other facade, which also has some reminiscences to the design of the facade of Michelangelo in San Lorenzo. So meaning that Machuca was a very well versed person that has been either we don't know about him in Italy, in the sense that there is no reference of Italian sources on him. So he was probably a junior person who was in touch with all the masters and geniuses of the time. The next stop I'm bringing is Monasterio del Escorial in Spain, which is both a monastery and a palace. And I am bringing it because it's a very, very extremely austere building, as you can clearly see. But it's also a good exercise how, even with austerity, you can get a beautiful composition. And you can very clearly see here that obviously the side facade are very, very, very plain and austere. But then the front facade is not only like a hole in the center to mark the symmetry. We have towers, and we have two intermediate bodies that are like giving rhythm to the facade. And this is very important, the rhythm. We will talk about that later. We were talking about it last week, about the importance of rhythm in architecture. And here you can see the extremely austere facade in Doric order with the other secondary entrances and the tower. All that is giving a set of hierarchy and rhythm to the elevation. See also here the two little details of the grid, because it's a reference over the martyrdom of San Lawrence. San Lorenzo was martyred by being like grilled, literally grilled, on the by the Roman authorities. And apparently it is said that they first grilled him with the face up, and then at some point he told the Romans that he was already done on the backside, please turn me. So that was what the legend says. So at least we can say that St. Lawrence had some sort of humor. But what I want you to see is how, with a very plain, austere facade, you can still achieve a very effective and very beautiful design. And this design obviously made a school in Spain, and by extension in a good portion of the Americas. This is the Ducal Palace of Lema, which has very, very clear reminiscence of it. And we can see here a very, very uniform set of openings, and then just all interrupted by a beautiful pedimented portico entrance, which is it's like we could say there is like a standard solution taken from the Barocco, from any pattern book of the time. But you have all the austere elements at and the towers at the same time are flanking you the composition. So bear that in mind, that in a long facade, the only important element is not only the central axis, but also the flanking sides or flanking elements. And on that side, I wanted to bring as well the Alcazar in Toledo as a way of playing with the giant orders, in the sense that we have like a double, very, very tall or a rusticated order, which is not even a Tuscan or pseudo Tuscan. Then we have a Tuscan dash Doric over pedestals, and then we have like a very, very, very shallow arcade. So creating a very, very monumental facade combination of brick and stone that creates a lovely effect. And again, the towers flanking. And on the other main facade, it has two main facades. Facing the city, we have a proper Renaissance facade, which is bringing still a lot of medievalism, because in Spain it was very popular to have the loggia and the arcade, which comes as well from Italy, to have an arcaded loggia and then all the other pedimented entrances in there, and the extremely rusticated entrance. Next stop is the so-called the Royal Alcazar of Madrid, which is where the current Royal Palace sits. And this was again like a very, very typical Castilian architecture, inherited from El Escorial. You can see the similarities with all the buildings you have seen before. The two flanking towers, the central facade, the columns ordering the facade. It has some reminiscence as well. You can see them today in the Plaza Mayor of Madrid, which we saw last week. And for those of you who didn't come last week, the videos have been uploaded to YouTube, so you can watch them. If you search for Salon of Classical Architecture on YouTube, you will get the videos. Unfortunately, the Royal Alcazar went on fire in the 1740s, and no, 1734, apologies, and it was rebuilt as the now well-known Royal Palace in a completely neoclassical, very beautiful neoclassical style, inspired in Versailles, which is the next thing that I want you to take into consideration. And we have here the front elevation and the back. As you can see in here, it's the whole order of architecture is what is embracing the elevation. There is hardly any element that protrudes in the composition. We have obviously a small, well, relatively small entrance, which is just a little projection to the side, and also very, very interesting. Take a look at how we have composite columns, but then in the connecting parts, we don't have. We have a pilaster that has the same proportions of the Corinthian column, but it's more like an impost, or even we cannot call it a Tuscan, because it is a Tuscan. It's an anti, and you can very clearly see here on the side is the ante converted into a pilaster, or an impost converted into a pilaster. Very, very interesting resource that they took here, and that continues all over the palace, and therefore helping you to do the front and back of the palace. And as you can see, is this movement what is creating the hierarchy and the importance here. Our next stop, which is one of the references where the Royal Palace of Madrid was generated, was the so-called the Perrault's facade in the Louvre in Paris. This is very important facade because Perrault here combined columns in order to expand the span. So he paired the Corinthian columns with an intercolumnation very little, almost less than a diameter. And by pairing them, he added enough resistance to increase the distance between the lintels. If you have only one column, that will be very flimsy. If you have two columns, you are starting to create some stability. So this facade, as you can see here in straight elevation, was crucial for the development of classical architecture, would be praised by architects like Logier. Logier would praise this a lot, and would have a very, very heavy influence in future architecture because of its elegance. It's pairing the columns, which is something that you don't find in antiquity, and he creates something very, very interesting in here. And of course, we cannot leave France without talking about Versailles. And again, Versailles, like the Royal Palace in Madrid, doesn't have many elements that make one facade be more prominent than the other, but we have like a continuity of elements just interrupted punctually, which in some cases has been said that the facade of Versailles is boring, especially the facade facing the gardens doesn't have much action happening there, and the action is just little punctuations that are just establishing a rhythm over it. And also, what the good thing that the garden facade of Versailles brings is that it brings unity to what behind is a mixed match of functions of how the palace started to expand and how it engages with that. And also see the massive difference between the original core of Versailles that you can see here and the garden facade and the further extensions. So this is the original core of Versailles. You can see that it's more, it cannot even remind you to what we were seeing in Toledo and the Alcazar. It was a Baroque, it was what is called the Louis XIII style, because Versailles initially was like a small hunting pavilion used by Louis XIII that then Louis XIV enhanced. And obviously, this is the entrance court. And with the entrance court, it was expanded around, but the style of the court was kept as it was and then substituted by something much more flamboyant, which at the same time, this Doric order in the entrance matches very well the character of a hunting pavilion. You can see here a close-up view how the Doric starts being a giant order, and we will talk about giant orders in a moment, supported by just a Tuscan portico. But in this case, I mean, all the elements are such heavily rich, decorated, such heavy, rich materials, are all these columns made of porphyry or purple marble, that then it doesn't, they're not talking about simplicity, they're talking about royal simplicity, if that makes sense. And I wanted also to bring this image, despite the low quality, to see the difference between the old part to the left, which is the chateau built by Louis XIII, and then one of the extensions done during the reign of Louis XIV. So we can see like two different understandings of classical architecture in here, something a bit more late Baroque, late Renaissance, early Baroque, much more vernacular, if you want to say, with some quirks like this double triglyph, and then this up and down of the windows with something, sorry, with something much more ordered neoclassical distribution from the late Baroque. Because what you need to bear in mind is that in France, the Baroque architecture was what would later be known as neoclassical. The Baroque was very academic in all senses, as opposed to much more creative that you could see in Italy or Spain. And talking about palaces, we have to talk about Buckingham Palace in London, one of the most famous palaces all over the world. And again, we have a very, very, very interesting neoclassical facade. But this neoclassical facade is relatively new. It's from the beginning of 20th century. This is how the facade was looking by the end of 19th century. It's a completely different structure, much more Victorian, as you could say, because the palace had several refurbishments from the initial Buckingham House, because it was the house of the Duke of Buckingham, the famous Duke of Buckingham that appears in the Three Musketeers, by the way. And it was eventually acquired by the crown and then eventually transformed into a royal palace. And as part of that transformation, you can see this Victorian facade that then was turned into the otherwise beautifully designed Baroque Edwardian facade with a proper strict canonical classical language. They didn't go for the quirkiness of details that you can see, for example, in Madrid. Any questions so far about the facades of the palaces? No? Okay, let's continue. So we are going to talk about government and public buildings. So it's mostly buildings for the parliament, but we can see other buildings. The first one we need to talk about is the Piazza del Campidoglio in Rome, because it's one of the best examples of urban settlement and intervention in Rome, because it was a square that was like very medieval, though done in patches over the time. The square was keeping some Roman sculptures that have been taken there at different types of different stages of the Middle Ages. And then by the 16th century, they wanted to turn it into a proper new center of Rome. Also considering it was the Capitoline Hill, that's what it calls the Campidoglio, and has views dominating the city. It was like actually what the Roman government was sitting in there, and it was commissioned to Michelangelo. And Michelangelo here brings something interesting, which is the first time we see a conscious use of the giant order. The giant order is an order that occupies more than one level in a building. And here is the first time that they are used in a very conscious, self-conscious way, not just as a way of patching and solving aesthetic solution. Vitruvius talked a little bit about it when he mentions in the Basilica of Fanum that there is a central core of columns and there is a gallery around the columns supported by what he calls retropilasters. So which means that there was probably a sort of pilaster attached to the column in Fanum, and therefore, but we don't have any preservation of Fanum or the other elements that we have from classical antiquity. They don't have that things, so we keep that idea from there, and Michelangelo as the first one in proposing this beautiful giant order. Another very very big and massive complex of civil buildings in London is Somerset House. It was initially a palace for the Duke of Somerset, but then eventually it was acquired by the government and then converted during 18th century into a massive complex of offices, initially for the Royal Navy, but eventually for any other initiative or any other public services that needed to be allocated there, to the point in which what it is now the Victoria and Albert Museum was in its first stages allocated there as part of the Museum of Manufacturers. Nowadays, it's a museum and cultural center. There is still some parts still in use by the Navy, but for example, the offices of the very well-known Adam Architecture in London, they have offices in Winchester and London. The offices in London are based here in the attics of Somerset House. Quite a beautiful place to work reviving classes in. Don't you think so? Something more simple, but I mean a bit more recent. This is the Aduana, the custom offices in Cadiz in Spain. And this building was done in the 50s. So by an architect who is still alive, Rafael Manzano Martos, who got the Dream House in 2010. So it's a very simple but very beautiful composition, very inspired, as we were saying, in the El Escorial. We have rustication on the sides that are taking up to the cornice, and we see an entablature that has been reduced or almost eliminated just to keep only the last part, the cornice on it, while the architrave and the frieze have disappeared on the side. Are kept in the portico, but they're not on the side. And then the building was done in a concrete structure, but it still keeps the reminiscence of the pinnacles as a structural element that would fix and settle the structure. And as another building from the same time, we have seen El Escorial, we have seen other buildings. This is again from the 1940s, 1950s. This is the Air Force headquarters in Madrid, Ministerio del Aire. Again, directly inspired in El Escorial and other buildings, and as a good example of how to achieve good architecture, good classical architecture with very simple means in any contemporary design. So it's quite a simple and effective way. And now we're moving to more parliament buildings. No, this is the famous Reichstag in Berlin before the interventions of Norman Foster, before it was burned in the 1930s. And you can very clearly see as well how all the elements are working to engage with each other. Now we have like towers which flank the side. You have a central portico, very important because the portico since Palladio is used to sacralize the space, so that's very important. And then some connection arcades which have like a very standard arch below, a pedimented opening above. And this system would be used in many parliament buildings that choose to have the neoclassical style. And you can also see, depending on how the regime was being structured, which style would you choose. So more parliamentary, more constitutional regimes that wanted to look to the future with the adoption of parliamentarism would go for neoclassical buildings as a link to the roots of democracy in Greece and Rome, while others wanted to keep, who were a bit more conservative, wanted to keep more the conservative power of the ruler, would go for Gothic, like the parliaments, houses of parliaments in London or the parliament in Budapest. This one that you can see here is on the 1850s and is the parliament in Spain, the Congreso de los Diputados. And we can see here it's relatively smallish building, and we can see here the portico and how the two flanking volumes, the columns disappear, the adoption of a very elegant attic that is solving a lot of space problem, giving just for nothing some extra space, and how the pilaster only are in the flanks. And as well the interesting rustication on the flanks, but then smooth walls on the central part. And I wanted to bring this other one, the Palacio Nariño in Bogota, in Colombia, because again this is from mid 19th century, and as you can see, I mean, it's adopting the idea from Versailles of using the double columns to just engage with a much bigger portico, and also see the corner condition of the column. So it's very interesting that the whole composition is more English than French, but you can get the whole idea of what I am talking about. We're moving forward, and we're going to talk about churches and cathedrals. But before that, any question? No? Okay, let's continue. So this is a selection that I am going to do, because it's more to see how a type evolves into another, and then some exceptions to the rule. So the first church that we're going to see today is Santa Maria Novella in Florence. This church was done by Leon Battista Alberti, and the thing is that this was a Gothic church, and Alberti was commissioned to do a new modern Gothic, a new modern, a new Renaissance facade to express it. I mean, which is something that obviously in Italy they were always very happy to do, because Gothic was never an Italian thing. It was always something that was coming from the north, but obviously for construction techniques and etc. it would still be used. And one of the big important elements that Alberti brought here, it was the first time they were used, were these two scrolls to connect the very long lower part of the facade with a narrower center, which is also making a connection within the short side naves and the tall central nave. And all the other architectural elements that you can see here, they are classically inspired, but they are Alberti's own collection of details. Very interesting, a very, very interesting and lovely composition. Please be aware, you will see a lot of golden ratios, Fibonacci spirals placed around this facade. Please don't make much use of them. There is a monography from the 1970s, which you can also get online, where you get the proper analysis of the facade, which is just looks a bit more boring. It's based on circles and squares, but it's more realistic than the Fibonacci squares placed in odd places just to make it look. Because as you should know by this stage, with a good Photoshop, everything fits with the Fibonacci series. So bear that in mind. So this model that Alberti settles with the scrolls to connect the side naves would be used later on. This is an intermediate element from late 14th century in San Agostino in Rome, that then would be perfection and taken to the perfection by El Gesù in Rome, by Vignola. And of course, with the Jesuit expansion, would be taken everywhere to France, where we can see very clearly how they adopted this scheme in the Church of Val-de-Grâce, to Spain in a more subtle way. You can see here the use of the scrolls in the El Escorial, which we already saw, but also in Mexico. So it is normally said that the principles of architecture flourish in Mexico because they didn't have any constraint neither in terms of precedents, originals, or any other thing. And despite you cannot see the scrolls, there are little scrolls here and there, but what I want you to see is more the connection element. The scroll understood as a connection element between the side facade. So that's why I wanted to bring it here, like a very vague and distant connection, but still based on Vignola. And a sort of back to the origins, the otherwise very famous Church of St. Paul's in Covent Garden in London, because this model that we have seen, which will be a model that will be adopted and promoted by the Catholic Church. So Protestant churches, and the Church of England as a Protestant one, would look to other ways. And one of the things that they were always accusing the Catholic Church, which is the like waste money, do a lot of richness, blah blah blah. So this church in Covent Garden was supposed to be like the example of the good way of doing architecture, and also it's a sort of archaeological exercise to reconstruct the so-called temple in the forest that Vitruvius talks about, that is the prototype of the Tuscan temple. So he creates this wonderful facade where we don't even have a cornice. The cornice are all these little rafters protruding to create the roof. It's a really, really, really beautiful facade. But here comes the trick. This isn't actually the facade. This is the back of the church. So this door that you see here is not a door. You cannot open. It's just a stone, and the main altar is just behind that opening. In order to enter into the church, you need to go through these two gates, and this is what you will see in your entrance. So the gates would be here and here, and then you enter, and this is the access. Very, very interesting, and completely different language. Here it's a more English architecture. See also the rustication, and quite a difference between the facades, to the point in which you would even say that this is a rear facade. This doesn't have like the importance or the impression of this one, but also take in mind that if you were building that facade, sorry, here, you were building it like in the back of the square, so that's why it actually looks like a back door. And of course, we cannot talk about facades of churches without talking about the most important church of the Christendom, which is St. Peter's Basilica, built as a result of many iterations since the original Roman Constantine Basilica was demolished. And we can see here some very nice elements. We have a very majestic use of the giant order, very good use of main and secondary doors. You can see here these ones taken directly from the Campidoglio, engage all of them to give you lateral access, but also the front access. Minimal arched doors in the narrower parts of the entablature, and then niches in the side. So it's a very interesting overall composition that once you are there, it doesn't look as big as it actually is. So it's quite a virtue that it has there. As opposed to that, and also very inspired in the colonnade of the Louvre, we have St. Paul's Cathedral in London. As you know, London was destroyed on a fire in 1666, and the cathedral was very so heavily damaged that it had to be demolished and then rebuilt. And the architect who was rebuilding was Christopher Wren, who had been in Paris in his youth, so he probably saw that colonnade of the Louvre or knew about it, and then implemented the same idea in the facade of a church. So we went from a palace to a church, and we can very clearly see here how the columns are paired to ensure like a big span. This facade will be very celebrated again for the same reasons as the Louvre in France, and then would be somehow imitated in other cases. We have the facade of Saint-Sulpice in Paris, where the columns that have been parallel to the facade would be perpendicular to the facade, that would settle again a new model of churches that then would be repeated in the Almudena Cathedral in Madrid. And this cathedral was finished in the 1990s. So all these things, the cathedral was started in Gothic style in the 1850s, underwent several iterations, but all the elements that you can see here were finished in the late 90s. So all the external envelope, instead of being the original neo-Gothic that wanted to be, it was done in a more neoclassical style to match the Royal Palace, which is sitting in front of the Royal Palace, and also the typical architecture of Madrid on the time, because we keep very little medieval architecture, because Madrid was a very little relevant city in the Middle Ages. Only becomes important once the king puts it as the capital. Any questions about churches and cathedrals? Okay. No? Okay. So we're moving to libraries. Libraries, the oldest library that we know is the Library of Ebla in Iraq, and that's from 3,000-4,000 years before Christ. And we know that there was a library because Ebla was a sort of city palace, and they were storing tablets of clay in there with written stuff, which was separated by proper subjects. And it was like a miscellany of knowledge. It was not only like from time to time you find close to a temple, you might find anthems and information relatively to the administration of the temple. In other places, you might find information about the tributes. But this was more about general knowledge, a lot of theology, religion, agriculture, geography, history. So it was very, very interesting to be discovered. But this is not the image that you have here, is not the Library of Ebla, it's the Library of Celsus in Ephesus, which is one of the most celebrated buildings of Roman architecture, and it was just a library. And I wanted to bring it here because of the quirkiness of the facade and the brilliance of the architect who designed it. This facade cannot get even better than this. You have it's not you have like four mini porticos projecting, creating three entrances, but also the porticos are stacked, but they don't create another portico above. The portico above is in between the three of the openings. And to finish engaging the composition, they put columns either side just sustained by itself by an entablature. So it's a very, very, very interesting and beautiful facade that it creates a lot of movement, a lot of dynamicity that we are not used normally to see in classical architecture. But this will be like we know now that Library of Celsus was restored in the 70s when enough amount of rubble and enough amount of material, because that was a pile of rubble, was taken out and restored. So to move to what we call now the modern library, we have to go after the French Revolution, and one of the first modern libraries that we would know nowadays is the Library of Sainte Genevieve in Paris, built over the monastery of Sainte Genevieve. It was destroyed in the French Revolution, and then here they built a new library to host the monastery collection. And it's a very simple building. We can see like it has like a base in stone with an arch, with some arches perforated in, which is the ground floor, which is where all the deposit is, and then a much more airy and arcaded upper floor with not much fanciness, just arches over impulse, like perforating the wall, but creating a very, very beautiful effect, bringing a lot of light, and also leaving you a lot of space to put more shelving on the inside, and at the same time bringing you some lights. And over the time, all the walls around here were like carved with names of people of importance for French culture. Moving again back to Spain, we have the National Library in Madrid, which was again built ex professo as a library to host what was initially the Royal Collection and then became like the National Library. And I wanted to bring it here because, as opposed to the uniformity of Sainte Genevieve, here we have a model that we have already seen before. The two flanking towers are a very important pedimented entrance, and then two very simple side connection. So it's very, very interesting scheme that it's very simple. The central portico could be even more simplified, and that would give you like a beautiful composition. Or the New York Public Library, again, in this case, organized as if it was like a Roman bath with a very beautiful portico entrance, flanking volumes, and then development. You see that we have like a little pattern. This is not only about a continuous facade, you need to create a rhythm. And in this case, we have like central element, flanking bands, connection. Those are the three minimal elements that you will find in all compositions of this type. And at a smaller scale, the Pierpont Morgan Library in New York is another example of a much smaller library. This was the private collection of Mr. Morgan, who made a massive fortune and was a heavy collector of books. And nowadays, it's a cultural institution that hosts and maintains the deposit. But you can very clearly see as well that a lot of importance is given to the Serliana here in the entrance, but then the architecture dilutes to the sides, and the importance is kept through the entablature and through the sculptural panels. So that is also important to consider how you keep the relevance and the importance and the attention on an architecture that you don't want to be very important, but that still needs some importance. This is a very perfect way of keeping it. You always have like the corner pilasters that are always a very helpful resource. And also take a look at as well as the capitals are ionic. And then this, the capital of this pilaster, which you might find a bit odd if you look close by, is not Tuscan, it's not Doric, it's an impost or the anti of the Ionic order. And when we do Roman classical, the anti corresponds with the impost. So it's either or. And you can see here the beautiful front facade with a mix. I would say that it has a mix of the elegance of Renaissance with the Serliana and the austerity of Spanish Renaissance with a very, very plain facade with very little projective ornaments. And even if many people put it as a precursor of modernism, I like bringing the Public Library of Stockholm because it's still a classical composition. And this intersection between the cylinder and the cube and the beautiful tapered entrance is very, very, very interesting. And again, this is the bare minimum that you could keep in a facade to keep it classical. But yeah, I would still consider this as a classical example, the so-called Swedish Grace, which I recommend you to look on the internet because it has a very, very beautiful selection. This is from the 1980s, believe it or not. This is a Harold Washington Library in Chicago. Very, very beautiful, old style, beautiful big public library building, as you could see anywhere in the States in 19th century. And obviously, I mean, it's a very big homage to Henry Hobson Richardson. And I always say at the Classic Planning Academy that when we talk about Romanesque, we need to talk about Henry Hobson Richardson because it was the one who brought Romanesque to new utility. No, he made Romanesque useful as a result of inspiration to all of us, and not just as a decorative result as a resource that was used in the Victorian times. So very, very impressive library, which you can see plenty of light entering, lovely, just archivolted um, entrance arches. So very, very, very nice. And even more ones. This is the Bodleian Art, Archaeology and Ancient World Library in Oxford, formerly known as Sackler Library, by Robert Adam. Robert Adam, the Robert Adam from Adam Architecture. No? This was done in the early 2000s, and again, it's a majestic example of how to achieve a beautiful entrance in a Greek revival. What you see there at the bottom, that round structure, is the library itself. This is just the access, but because the library sits on a former courtyard, then you need to do like a skewed access, but it's a very, very beautiful entrance in a standard iconic Greek revival, and then your building behind. So it's a very beautiful mix. And still staying within the Doric order, we have the Maitland Robinson Library in Cambridge, in which here this is by Quillan Terry. And here Quillan Terry used the metopiece to put the different sculptures, making allegories and making reference to the knowledge that the library hosted. And we can see here classical like medicine, law, history represented by the sand clock, but also technology represented by the antenna, and also geography represented by the globe. Any questions about library? Any library that I haven't mentioned that you would have loved to see mentioned here? Please, not the library in Vipuria by Alvarado. No? Okay. We have a shared audience. Remember that at the end of the class, because this is in English, but the question and answer time, we do it in English and Spanish. So please feel free to speak in Spanish after we finish. So talking about museums, we know that in the Acropolis of Athens, they had some sort of exhibition because actually the famous paintings by Apelles were there. But the first building that we can call as a, but that it matches with our contemporary idea of the museum was the Forum of Vespasian, the Templum Pacis in Rome. And why am I calling this the first museum? Because what Vespasian did was he built this forum to host all the art collection of Nero that Nero had in the Domus Aurea was placed here. Technically, not all the art collection, because, for example, a sculpture like the Laocoonte, they stayed buried in the Domus Aurea and discovered in the Renaissance, but most of them stayed here for almost all antiquity as the first museum dash open air museum, because apparently Nero gathered an amazing, impressive collection of sculptures. And this is one of the Prado Museum in Madrid is probably one of the first museums built as such. It was not initially built as fine art museum. It was built as a science cabinet, so meaning like a science museum. But what I like about the Prado Museum, and we're going to see some details now, is like we have a very simple flanking elements, almost diluting and integrating with the surroundings. We have a massive but austere in Tuscan order entrance facade, and then we have a very interesting connecting elements, both in rusticated ground floor and then Ionic arcade. And I'm bringing this image so that you can see the volumetry, because nowadays it's very difficult to get a nice, good aerial picture of Prado Museum simply because the trees have grown and they are blocking the entrance. And this is what I meant. We have like a very, very big Doric entrance. I said Tuscan before, no, it's Doric. You can see here the little glimpse of the triglyph, massive Doric entrance. And then the connecting elements, the connected bands are semi-rusticated ground floor with colonnaded Ionic order. Is very, very beautiful in terms of the engagement of the different elements. So it's something that I recommend all of you to check and to look at for inspiration, the facade of the Prado Museum. And at the same time, the facade of the Altes Museum it's another beautiful neoclassical resort. This is much later. This is the 1830s, done by Carl Friedrich Schinkel in Berlin to host the ancient art collection of the kings of Prussia. That's what is called the Altes Museum, the old museum. And the most striking thing of this museum, on top of the beautiful colonnade with the two antaes, is the massive central opening that is bringing the vestibule to the outside and the inside to the outside. That's the proper bringing the outside into the inside and not just opening a big window to the kitchen. This is the proper bringing the outside to the inside and the inside to the outside. And as a series of museums that we're going to see, we cannot stop mentioning the British Museum, which was like the jewel of the crown for the British culture of and British exploration, and some would say exploitation, but let's leave it there. British exploration, British achievements in cultural terms. And it's a very beautiful, very impressive octa-style portico in Ionic order, that and then surrounded by the Ionic facade. It's very it's more Greek revival than Roman, and it's trying to make a connection, of course, with the jewel collection, which is the marbles of the Parthenon. So we have, and this building was like a lot of money was put on it, and done with care. As opposed to that, we have the National Gallery, where the architect in here had to reuse the rejected capitals from the British Museum. The British Museum was originally going to have these columns, this Corinthian order, and then eventually they decided to ditch to the Ionic, and then basically they give him, you must use these columns for it. And the building is a bit strange in composition, but it does quite well considering all the problems that the architect faced. We have like a central element crowned by a dome as well, and then we have like two other like side flanking volumes, and then on the side the ends don't have any flanking element; they just end like that. So it's simple and interesting. And just also to show something of what's happening in the classical world outside Europe, this is the art gallery of New South Wales, completely Greek revival. It's not, this is not anymore a Roman classical revival with these beautiful cushioned capitals. And I just what I brought it here, so just to show you the beauty of how classicism expanded through all over the world for all people, for all nations, which is something that I love saying when I do my classes. And as opposed to this, like very strict neoclassical that we have been seeing in all of them, Abuse Art Museum, which is the Museum of Art and History in Geneva, this is proper Beaux-Arts architecture. This is not any sort of restraint, any sort of um, simplicity, austerity. No, this is just to show off, and this is the beauty of the Beaux-Arts architecture. Is how the composition may still be simple because we have an entrance and an arcade either side. In principle, it's not very complicated, but then we have like all the sculpture display, the massive glazed dome, the abundance of festoons, etc. That is what is giving the grandeur to the building. And also, I mean, see here, this element that you see here is this one. You can see it's a lady with a trumpet, which is fame, which at the same time is an allegory of history, you know, with the history with the trumpet of fame. And then here is the side facade, where you can see that yeah, the flamboyance returns. Here they use escamozzi capitals to prevent any problem with the corner, which is a good solution. See, for example, here as well, how in order to prevent the pilaster facing a corner, yes or no, they have just continued and done like a small projection. And then how in the side facades, the composition becomes much more simpler. We keep the same proportion of the arcades, but we eliminate everything else. So the side facade is a great example of what it is called the design by dilation. Any questions about museums?
All good.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to see now markets. A market is something that they have always existed, but remember, we're talking about facades. So I needed to select here the market that have the most striking facades. And one of those has to be, of course, the gate to Miletus Market, which is now in Berlin. It's an impressive facade, not as impressive as Celsius Library, but still quite incredible. And as you can see, I mean, it has, in this case, the flanking elements are like a proper two-column portico. We have like a balcony here with this lovely coffer, so quite a structural achievement back then. But this is not a part of the cornice. This is not part of the column above. This is a pedestal or pseudo pedestal that takes the shape of an attic. Very interested the way they did it, and of course the broken pediment to enter. So if you ever go to Berlin, you must not mix the gate of Miletus. In that regard, we have the Halles de Paris, the central markets of Paris, which I bring because, well, the facades might not be very important. The whole thing as a structure, as a unity, has a very big had a very big importance for French architecture, for the structure of the city of Paris, and also its destruction meant the salvation of other similar markets, because the city of Paris struggled to find a replacement for that. They wanted to get rid of it out of it's old, nobody comes here anymore, people should go to supermarket, not to local markets, blah blah blah, which was a very 1960s 1970s attitude. And then nowadays, I mean, imagine it hadn't demolished all that. Nowadays would be an amazing gourmet market in the center of Paris. I mean, we have to be realistic. It wouldn't have stayed as a general goods market, but it would have become an extremely important hub for the city of Paris. Not that it has been for 40 years, almost 60 years, just an empty space in the city. I think that now that they finally did a shopping mall is when people are starting to go. And in that direction, Covent Garden in London was going to have the same fate. So we saw the Covent Garden's church. So this is, if you are in that facade that we saw before, if you turn 180 degrees, this is what you see, the entrance to a beautiful market hall in a very simple Doric style, but at the same time keeping all the neoclassical elements. So this is not a pure Greek revival, it's an hybrid between Greek revival and proper English neoclassical together with some beautiful Victorian metal structure, like a proper market should be. And now we're coming to the south, where markets would be built upon the same hygienistic criteria than these other ones in France and London, but they would be full in a full traditional way. So this market in Ortigia in Sicily has like an entrance, which you can see here to the left, and then the whole development of the building, excluding the flanking the corners, is just a succession of arches with a very beautiful courtyard inside. So with the thing is that all the stalls would be both in each of these doors and also within the square. So that's the beauty of these markets. And this is the market in Cadiz, very similar scheme, but in a very, as we will see, in an extremely beautiful and sleek Doric order. I mean, this is inserted completely in the urban fabric of the city, only a small high level opening so that you can use all the walls at your disposal to build. And these are the beautiful Doric columns that you have on the inside. And also please note the timber lintel. Very, very beautiful element. And to finalize this section, I wanted to bring like a quirkiness of it. The Tarazanas market in Malaga is an hybrid between the Haussmannian market, but in this case, is bringing a quirk. And this quirk is the facade gate, which is inspired or a very freestyle reconstruction of the gate to the shipyards of Malaga in Arab times. So it was dismantled and rebuilt there with some embellishments and enhancements, as you would call them in 19th century, to give access to the market. So we have like a combination of Islamic architecture and cast iron architecture. Very, very, very beautiful. And now we are going to see hospitals. Any questions about market? Let me check the chat. No questions. So welcome to all of you who have been coming since I started speaking. If you have arrived late, don't worry. The video will be uploaded to YouTube very soon. So hospitals, we always have the idea of the septic spaces, and that it's something that no, we shouldn't go decorative. It has to be like a box, a white box, blah blah blah. But we all feel better when we are in beautiful places, and why shouldn't we have that right? And I'm starting with one of the oldest Renaissance hospital building, Ospedali degli Innocenti, in Florence, with the loggia done by Filippo Brunelleschi, which is one of the first mark points of the Renaissance. You can see a beautiful arcade here, and behind this is a more medieval building with several Renaissance patches, but it creates like a very, very prominent facade with a loggia, which is very important in Italy, both not only for the functional thing of keeping you fresh in hot weather and dry in wet weather, but also to give you the representative thing of you staying and sitting there and receiving people there during public functions and events. What it is now the regional parliament in Sevilla was known as the Hospital de las Cinco Llagas, Hospital of the Five Wounds. And it was one of the massive hospital complex in Europe back in time. You can see here the scale of it. You can see here all the red things about the cars, and you can see that it was going to have like five big courts, then four smaller courts, and a central one with the church, which is now the Parliament Hall. So it's a very, very incredible building, very, very simple. You can see this is all repetition. Boom, 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 boom. This is what we could call the equality proportion, no? Equality in the sense that everything is equal. But also take a look at how we still keep the reference of the little scrolls to connect the elements. This other hospital that I wanted to bring to the discussion is the old St. George's Hospital in London, which was active up until the 50s. Now it's a luxury hotel. But again, it's a very simple building that it can be very well set of inspiration shall you ever need to design a sanitary building. And moving towards to the other extreme, one of the most ever beautiful clinics of hospitals ever built, Dr. Murga Hygienic Institute in Sevilla, unfortunately demolished in the 1950s, but this was probably one of the most incredible hospitals ever built. You can very clearly see it's like looks like a museum, but no, it was a hospital, a clinic, a sort of private clinic, but that's what it was. So it's you see the central portico, the two side porticos. This is like the British Museum, but in a compressed version dedicated to healthcare. It's very, very beautiful and interesting. And we're coming to an end to this selection of facades for interesting buildings and the buildings that makes the cityscape and the relevance on the cityscape. And considering contemporary times, we cannot not speak about commercial buildings. And we're going to start with what it is considered the first commercial building, the Marshall Field store in Chicago by Richardson. You can very clearly see as well, I mean, this idea of the Romanesque heaviness that he was keeping, but at the same time, the lightness. So, how with all this triple arcade, he's just integrating three volumes while he's keeping like a base a bit more sturdy, and then it gets lighter as you go above. No, we have one arch and then two arches and then four openings. So it gives you much more and more lightness in an otherwise very, very simple structure. Things would start getting complicated very soon. And of course, I couldn't continue without mentioning Harrods, which is the nowadays, despite not being the first department store, I think that nowadays is what everyone has in mind when we talk about the luxury department store. I mean, the Harrods was funded and expanded into several rows. It went so good that it even had a succursal in Buenos Aires that doesn't exist anymore. But that's the thing, and there is only one Harrods. It's which is part of the charm of the chain itself. Well, you have Harrods still in the airports, but that's a new thing. And what I want you to see here, the facade, there is nothing simple here. Everything has been done to enhance the importance of the building. So we're talking here about a palace of commerce rather than just a department store. And we see all the symbols and signs of palatial architecture everywhere, excepting the massive gallery at first floor level, and obviously the amount of openings at ground level. You can see them in a better way here. Of course, the dome, which is not a dome that you enter at some point and they see all the heights. It's more a dome to give urban importance than to give an internal space. And also, it has a very, very interesting rhythm because it has 2, 4, 3, 3, 3, 4, 2, 2. Or so it's very, very, very interesting. And if you take a look in detail, the facade is not fully symmetrical because of the presence of this tower here, just to anchor it to the corner. But also see that this volume to the left is slightly shorter than the volume to the right, which also has an intermediate window. But in the overall scale of the facade, you don't see it. So this is also very important for when you are designing big, long facades. The rhythm is very important. The symmetry is very important, but not. But if necessary, you can make exceptions and create a small quirky symmetries to compensate. And this is an example of the very late Victorian architecture, like very mixed, what we could call what modern is calling a very despective way, eclecticism. But this is here, it's a combination of everything. Back in time, what's called Queen Anne style. But as opposed to that, I like to bring Selfridges again in London. This is much later. This is from the 1909, 1910, and this is a beautiful neoclassical building. This is and as you could see before, as you could compare in Harrods, where the windows are like window size, let's call like a small building size, that's by the scale. Here we have completely forgotten about anything that is not a window. So the columns are supporting the structure, but then every single space within the structure has been placed a window with a spandrel to ensure space for the slab and epoxy ceilings, but that's what you get. It's very, very effective, and you see this a lot in many other buildings of the time, especially the 1910s, late 1900s, early 1910s. You see this quite a lot. It's very inspiring and very useful because it shows you that you can still keep the structural purity that the modernists like to keep, can be also retained with this. And you can see here a portion of the elevation where you can very clearly see, even if it is not colored, that all this vertical axis for the for the load bearing areas, while the rest is just panes of glass. But at the same time, these panes of glass have a structure on themselves. So we are not talking about naked panes of glass. We are talking about a very beautiful structure and engage panes of glasses. And as opposed to the neoclassical elegance and uniformity of Selfridges and bringing liberties, which is very close. It's like 10 minutes walk one from the other. This was done in the 1920s. And of course, this is totally imitating a Tudoresque fantasy, both in the outside and in the inside. So everything here is to emulate like a different golden era of England, the sort of Elizabethan era, and it's a very beautiful building, quirky for external and internal. And you can also very clearly see here how all the symmetry has almost is retained in terms of volumetric structures, but then it's gone. This flanking to the right, the left has two windows. This has a bay window. This has a lot of. This has two gables, and this has no gables. Has some dormers and a gallery. But once you see in the first instance, it is kept as a symmetry basically because of the power of these two flanking volumes. So keep that idea as well. The power of the overall symmetry versus the detailed symmetry. And with this, we cannot forget, of course. I mean, I'm not sure if the people who were involved in this are here today, but I wanted to bring a little department store in Madrid, the so-called Almacenes Rodriguez, which was the first department store in Spain. That was, unfortunately, it's a photo from the 60s. These were unfortunately demolished at the beginning of the early 70s, and a modernist facade was built. And last year, Motín Arquitectónico did a competition. We were also sponsoring and helping them on the competition to do like a new facade for the Almacenes Rodriguez. The idea wasn't to rebuild or to claim to rebuild the original facade. We just wanted to design a new facade that would be these are the three, the one that was selected by the jury as the three most relevant one. The central one is the facade who won, and the two side ones were honorary mentions, because to truly get the spirit of Madrid in those times, each of them in its own unique way. And I wanted to bring in them because they are good examples themselves about how to design a facade of a relevant building. So thank you very much for doing all these designs. If any of you are here today, and for the rest, it's very inspiring. You can do it. These people learn how to do it, and they can, and you can. So this is very important for all of you. And finally, some very little tips as I did last week when you are designing a big facade. So as always, design the plan with elevation in mind. Never start with the plan and then figure out what to do with elevation. Do step by step. Divide the elevation in three parts is always very helpful. A base, which can be heavier, an intermediate, which should be simple, and a coronation, which can be as flamboyant as you want. All base and coronation are important. The intermediate is never heavily decorated. It's always a connection between a connection volume. A simple connection volume doesn't mean that it has to be like a plain, a smooth surface. Means that it needs to be simplified because it's going to be very long, so that's understood very distracting. As opposed to the little facades that we were seeing last week, Axial symmetry should be pursued in this case, unless there is any powerful reason, like big difference of slope, etc. Axial symmetry should be pursued. The rhythm is still very important. We were seeing the Escorial, Versailles. You see how you go up, you go down. You have flanking elements, you have connection elements. All that is important to have. The openings have always to be aligned. That's a rule of traditional architecture, or you could combine them as well, but always within an axis. Don't be afraid of using giant orders because it will help you to reduce the height of the facade. That doesn't mean that you need to use all of them or that you need to use a giant order to cover 5 floors. Maybe you have like a rusticated base, then you have a giant order covering 2 or 3 floors, then you have like a development flat and smooth or flattish and smoothish, and then you have a coronation with another giant order. So be wise on using them. And of course, always learn from the local precedents. They are the ones that are going to set up the mood. If there are not local precedents, you can expand your area, but always be local in your precedent selection because it will bring back the spirit of the time and the area. And we are done by this stage. So I'm going to start now before I do the final announcement. Now is question time, comment, debate, tertulia, and as I said, I don't know if which percentage of Spanish versus English speakers we have, but this is it's either language. So please free to say something, to comment, to discuss. If we said in Spanish, we will make some resumes at the end of the discussions. If not, please feel free to say something.
Hello, Pablo. I
Oh,
just want to thank you for your presentation. This was such a magnificent architectural selection, and your comments were very nice in uniting like all the elements from the picture selection.
mhm.
And yes, I value your tips. They are very helpful, and I've been catching up on the previous videos on
Okay.
YouTube.
Okay,
And
good to see that people are actually watching the videos because you watch the statistics and okay, who's watching them? So it's good to see that you are that you're watching them and that people are finding them useful. I mean, these are points in which the only thing you can give is tips and ideas because there is not a lot of people think that there is like a method. I always say, I mean, the people come and ask me, oh, what's the rule for rustication? What's the rule when I want to have a broken carved pediment over a swan neck pediment? And I said, there is no rule for that. You need to figure out yourself. So there are things that the only thing you can do, or how did he do it? I said, well, he did this thing because he wanted to. Perrault did the facade of the Louvre because he wanted to. He was trying to find a way of having more span. And he thought, okay, if I pair the columns, it's working. Okay, I'm going to put them together. I cannot put them very close. I shouldn't put them 1.5 diameters of separation because that will be Picno style. I don't want that. I want a little bit less. But and then you start trying. You keep yourself within the proportionate system, but you need to create your own sub rules. No, it's like uh, when a writer decides that they are only going to use certain type of adjectives or certain types of proverbs or certain type of verbs. So that's the same thing, or certain punctuation styles. So there is a novel called Los Santos Inocentes, which is written as a whole sentence. So it has not ending punctuation. And when you read it, it's very interesting because when you're reading it, it feels that you're part of a conversation of a person who is like overexcited talking about something and has to tell you everything very quickly. So it's the book is not very long, but because the way it's written, you read it very quick because the whole style is prone to give you there. Now, if you ask Miguel Delibes, which was the recipe to do that, probably that was not a recipe. So that's what you need to bear in mind when you are designing.
do you think each particularity, like for example, the double columns in the Louvre or like from that facade of the Greeks where they were like with movement. Do you think that they came up because they were trying to solve a problem, or they were just trying to create a unique composition? Where do you think that each particularity stems up
I think it
in
was
each
more unique.
building?
It was more unique solution, and obviously the unique solution has to be is a problem to be solved. So I don't think that Perrault was having in mind, I want to have a wider span of columns. What can I do? I think he wanted to experiment and say, okay, what happens if I pair the columns? And maybe what he discovered is that rather than saying, oh, I want to have the widest span as possible, maybe what he was saying, oh, what if I pair the columns? So he was maybe trying both options at the same time. But I would say that the design comes first rather than to the resolution of problems, at least in those cases where you are free to design. For example, Alberti in Santa Maria Novella was 100% solving a problem. He ended up being creative, but was 100% solving a problem. Vignola in El Gesù was 100% being creative. So I think that that settles a bit the I mean, obviously I have put you the two extremes and then you have all the in betweens. But that's more or less, or for example, Michelangelo in San Lorenzo. I didn't show it, but it was another very popular thing to consider back then. Michelangelo in the facade of San Lorenzo, he's solving a problem. He's being creative, he's giving a creative solution to a problem, but the origins of his proposal comes from solving a problem.
Mm, okay, thank you. That's very interesting.
It makes you think, no? It puts you, it puts creativity in its place. That doesn't mean it's a wrong place or a bad place. It's creativity, can be like wild creativity, no? You don't have any limitation, you explore what you want, or you have a restraint. You know what I mean? And some people hate when they have a restraint. I mean, I have been designing houses which you don't have any space limitation, or the space limitation is so big that you can do whatever you want. And it's lovely to design because you don't have any limitation. Then the other ones are in a very small plot, and you have to put a lot of things there, a lot of functions, and it's very challenging. And it's it's not so. In one case, I am being fully creative because I don't have any space limitation because the plot in where it sits is too big, and the regulations are flexible enough to let me do whatever I want. Or B, I have a relatively small plot of land and the regulations are very tight, and I still have to put a massive program. In one, I am more creative than in other. That's for sure. But I am not being, I don't stop being creative because I am solving a problem.
Okay. Yes, also the first of your tips reminded me of the Beaux-Art method of doing like starting with the facade or starting with skisses. Do you think that most of the neoclassic buildings, I mean, were they based on this method, or do
The
we
thing
know which kind of
is that the views are method. It's I mean, first, there is not a Beaux-Arts method as such. What we
okay.
know as Beaux-Art method is something that the Americans distill, as if you want distilling whiskey or tequila, from what their experience that they were having in Paris. So these people, they didn't have a school of architecture in the United States. They go to Paris, they see they call the Beaux-Arts, and they get fascinated by what they see. But they didn't told themselves the whole part of the story. They only saw what they wanted to see, and therefore what they brought back to the United States was an experience that it was very difficult to reproduce without the ecosystem that was already existing in Paris. And at the same time, they wanted to create a method out of it. So that's why you have Harbison and the others writing in the 1920s about the Beaux-Arts method and architectural composition. And there is a very, very beautiful book. I think I have it here. Where is it? Where do I have it? No, these ones aren't. Is it? Ah, here it is. So it's called, you can download it on the internet on archive.org. So the study of architectural design
Oh
by
yes, that's the one I'm reading currently. That's
John F.
why I.
Harrison. This is very good. This book is very, very good to understand what they were doing in the United States
Mhm.
from the 1880s to the 1940s. So it's very, very useful. And this book was written in the 1920s. So meaning that this guy comes as an idea for a method
Mhm.
40 years after being implemented. So when they arrived, basically they didn't know what they were doing. They were just imitating or emulating, you name it as you want, what they're doing in Paris. Another good one to understand in depth is this one. It's called The Struggle for Modernism by Anthony Alofsine. And this book is done from a modernist perspective to see how, especially the American university, but especially Harvard, they connect it with modernism. It's very good because it's telling you that the American universities were after something. After the 1920s, when they settle the Beaux-Arts system, or when they create, they put the basis for the system, is when they realize that the system is not anymore fit for purpose. Why? Because the needs have changed. They don't. The system is focused only on creating beautiful watercolor elevations, beautiful things, but not buildable things.
Mm.
Everything had to go through a structural engineer, etc., which is what these Americans forgot to see when they went to Paris. They went to
Yes.
the Beaux-Arts and they only went to the artistic classes. They didn't attend the technical classes. They forgot to go to the École Polytechnique, which is where you would go to learn proper architecture from the constructive perspective. So
Yes.
on that regard, the Beaux-Art system was a myth, which Notre Dame has now resurrected, and many others. What's the name of this one? The Benedictine College, the University of Utah, Miami, they are restoring it. They are doing it as part of the American tradition, but we have to be critical with with that Beaux-Art method because it doesn't give the full picture. The one I personally like, is the one from the École Polytechnique, the one created by Dugant. Lessons of Architecture by Jean-Nicole Louis Dugant, that again are available now for free on the internet by the Getty Foundation, Durand, Durand,
Durand. And what was the name again?
Durand,
And of the book or publication?
lessons on architecture.
Lessons on architecture. Yes, I've been also meditating on the Beaux-Art method and how in the programs like there is no connection with any context. So yes, I think we have to be critical too. But
There
yes.
is a critic to be done, and it is because the people who created the method, they stayed for a short time in Paris. They saw something in Paris that was working for Paris, and then they just inserted it as they could in the American environment. And that resulted in a big problem that was one of the reasons why everything got doomed very quickly, is that they created the atelier system. So in France, in Paris, you would go to university, but then you wouldn't be taught design. You would learn design at an atelier, which was like run by students. So the students would be doing their exercises in the atelier and would be presenting their atelier because the Mozart Academy was giving them prizes, and there were competitions every 6 months to get the best designs. And by winning those competitions is how the students were paying themselves their courses, or they would pay their fees with their own money. But those who were good enough, they would be paid by the government with a grant. So, and that was working well because the European system of education has been always heavily subsidized, and the bohemian way of living in Paris in the late 19th century was allowing you to have a bit of a bad life, if you could say so. But that wasn't the case in the United States. So what they started to the atelier system in the United States ended up becoming a source of cheap labor. And you were having people who couldn't afford studying, but they would be sucked into the atelier system and stay there their whole life in ateliers, just working as cheap draftsmen. And obviously, when Gropius comes in 1938 and says, "My system is not atelier, my system is a democratic collaboration," the ateliers disappears. So they hit their peak in 1935. And in 1938, they disappeared. This is not related at all with the Second World War, etc., because they disappeared before the Americans entering the war. And it's the moment that Gropius arrives and changed the rules. So this is important to consider that the system died of success, that the system had a lot of problems, and also that system was not the system that everyone was using. The British were using a different one. The French themselves, outside the school of the École des Beaux-Arts, were using a different one, and definitely the rest of Europe wasn't using the École des Beaux-Arts, was using the École Polytechnique. And that is the one that shapes the architect as we know now. So the modernists would take that system and would eliminate all ornamentation and implement that because the system was good in itself. And you can see that very clearly once you go out of France. Spain, for example, which I am going to talk about it in Oslo in a month. Spain didn't have the means and the money to be paying for competitions and grants, etc. So all the atelier system never developed in Spain. They because they followed the core polytechniques where you arrive, you get your lesson, you do your assignment, you present your assignment, pass, next. But obviously, it looks much more appealing to say the École des Beaux-Arts than the École Polytechnique, which looks much more.
Yes.
And that's probably where the Americans they got the North Americans, the people from the United States, they got the confusion. That's probably because I don't know much about the architectural education in Mexico, but I would put my hand on fire that it was not Beaux-Arts, it was a École Polytechnique.
Yes, it's very well, at least in my university, it was very technique and a lot of descriptive geometry, but
Yeah, that's
in
a, that's,
the like in the projects, like it's taken over by by modern ideologies. So that's
and,
where
and that is like a modern study. So that is like contemporary. But I'm talking about studying architecture in Mexico in the 1990s, 1910s.
mhm, yes.
I'm sure that the system, if what has prevailed nowadays in the schools of architecture is that, it is because the system was already polytechnic before. That's
Mm.
that's what I wanted to say, no? That those schools, especially like Latin American schools, Spanish, Mediterraneans, a good portion of Europe, they are like that because they got the good French model. And then the British got their own. The British did things their own way, as they usually do, but they were having their own polytechnique system without calling it polytechnique. But the whole thing of the atelier is a fantasy that the Americans created. It's like when people now go to Paris and think that it's like Emily in Paris. So that was the Emily in Paris of the 19th century. That's it. And it has its own flaws. It creates beautiful drawings, but it didn't tackle the problem. I mean, then when Gropius, which was a hater of French, he arrives to the United States, the first thing he wants to do is ditch the French system. But if it had been a polytechnic system, he would have found more difficult to ditch it. The whole struggle of the United States in the 19 in the last 5 years of the 1930s, 1935, 1940, to understand what they wanted to do as grown-ups is amazing. Because if it hadn't been for Gropius, it would have changed completely. It would have changed completely, completely. The whole United States would have been what we call now Art Deco, which back then it wasn't called Art Deco, it was called just modern. architecture. And that would have been like de facto architecture. It would have been a mix of, I mean, Frank Lloyd Wright would have stayed as the the rara avis that he was, because I like considering Frank Lloyd Wright as the last art and craft architect, in the sense that he was like unique and irrepeatable. So there can only be one Frank Lloyd Wright. And he would be annoyed if someone else wanted to emulate him, same as Michelangelo. They were such divas that they didn't even like admirers. So, but at the same time, that thing, I mean, it's very interesting to see. And very quickly after the war, that expands to Cuba, 1948, the burning of the Viñola, and to Santiago de Chile, 1949, burning of the Viñola. And then it was like, in both cases, it looks like a conspiracy. If there were people from Harvard, admirers of Gropius, close collaborators with Gropius, that happened to be Cuban or Chilean, they came to Cuban holiday. They make their own revolution in the School of Architecture. Remember that was during Batista, not during Castro. And then the riots, because they created a riot. They wanted to ban the library. They didn't, because the librarian was a decent person and managed to prevent them. But they went to all the sculpture department, the cast department, and destroyed all the cast. And then in that like massive thing, they said, no, we won't we will only come when Walter Gropius comes. Walter Gropius came with a new plan under his arm. Boom, changed the plan in Santiago de Cuba. Next year in Santiago de Chile, boom, that's the same. Brazil, you didn't need to, they did it themselves 20 years after, with during the own dictatorship. So it's very, very interesting how all that was changed just with Gropius, because Gropius went with a very interesting aura. No, it went like, oh, I was the director of the Bauhaus, the Nazis evicted me, and then everyone, oh yeah, he was the director of the Bauhaus, it must have been good. He was good, but he just had his own plans, not the plans that Harvard wanted him to do. That's basically. So that's why, I mean, that's why the Bossard method tends to die of success. That's my conclusion. We have to be careful with following, because you die of success if you follow it.
Pablo,
Yes,
where we can read about it?
this book. This is available at archive.org, so you can read it by yourself.
Okay, perfect.
The Struggle for Modernism. And it's also good because it's telling you a big day-to-day of how Harvard was in the 1890s. So this is not only about Walter Gropius, this is about studying architecture in the United States. And for example, you discover something, just 1 second, you discover something very interesting, and it's that they didn't teach the orders. Everyone had to come home from home with the orders learned. You were learning how to trace the orders at high school. That's a side note. Sorry, Betty, what were you saying, darling?
Can you explain again why dividing everything into styles isn't a good idea?
Why dividing into styles is not a good idea? Okay, let's go. Let's try to go back. I'm trying to find one that you could say, okay, what do we do with this? If you define it into styles, what do we do with this? Is it Islamic? Is it cast iron? Is it eclecticism? And with these ones, again, I mean, these might look like, instead of Cadiz, you are in Athens. Well, I mean, Cadiz is older than Athens, so you could say that, no? Cadiz is the oldest city in Western Europe, no? It's the 3,000 years old, or more than 3,000 year old city. It's like the oldest city in Western Europe. So, but how would you define this one? Is it, because this looks very clear that it could be Greek revival? Okay, fine. How do you define this? The facade. if you stick onto a style, I mean, the styles and define things into a style is necessary because we need to put ourselves temporary limits, temporary settings to understand where we are. But for example, anyone could see this, and if you don't know the history of the building, you say, oh, this is Renaissance, or this is neoclassicism, but this is 19th century neoclassicism, which comes after the hygienistic approaches to build like proper, better markets. Or what do you do again? What do we do with Covent Garden? Is it Greek revival? But Greek revival doesn't have balusters. Is it Georgian? Yeah, but Georgian doesn't have Greek Doric columns. Or is it cast iron? Well, I mean, cast iron could be anything, because cast iron refers to the material and not the style. Or this one, how do you define this? Because you can say, oh, this is Greek. It's too late to be Greek. It's Roman. It's not Roman. It's Hellenistic. Okay, we could call it Hellenistic. But then we are talking about a very, very particular thing that you cannot say, oh, I have designed the gate to my house in Hellenistic style. I think that the styles, the styles are a conceptual frame that we need to have, but we cannot be slaves of the style, because then it's like, oh, I mean, and a good example is like the word Art Deco or Art Deco. What is Art Deco? Why are we using it? Why? And why some of them are Art Deco, so why some of them aren't Art Deco? Why is the word strip classicism appearing from time to time in my WhatsApp group, etc., etc. So that's and all of them, they are something that back then none of them knew them with as way. That was simply contemporary architecture. So that's what I mean. That is very difficult. What sometimes is very easy. You cannot call Bernini any other thing but Baroque. But then for other buildings, especially as we come from 19th century, it's difficult to make the transition. Or for example, how would you define St. Peter's Basilica in Rome? Is it Renaissance? Is it Baroque? How would you define it? And it's an open question, no? It's like, because there is a big part structurally is Renaissance, but then the facade is Baroque, and internally the whole decoration is even neoclassical, because you have a lot of neoclassical there. So what's the, or Versailles? You could tell me Baroque, yeah, but which Baroque? Louis the 13th, Louis the 14th, or Louis the 15th style? You see, we have here, for example, a different delimitation to style. In France, you don't call the styles by name, you call the styles by the king, especially since Louis the 13th. You have Louis the 13th style, Louis the 14th, Louis the 15th, Louis the 16th, and then you don't have a revolutionary style, but you have the directory and empire style. But empire style doesn't end with the restoration. You don't have a Bourbon restoration style. You don't have a Louis Philippe style, which it's all part of different stages of the empire style. But then you have a second, very clearly differentiated second empire style, which is the opera of Garnier and Haussmann. But you see, I mean, but all that, but all that is very, very French, very, very Parisian. So you cannot say, I mean, there is some influences. You can see a little bit of Second Empire influence, French, which then once it goes out of France, is called eclecticism. But even for Victorian architecture, you have at least 3 stages of Victorian architecture. You have like the late Georgian architecture at the beginning of a reign. You have like the proper Victorian neo-Gothic, which is like the most prevalent. Then you have Queen Anne, which is from the 1870s onward. And then you have the pre-Edwardian and Edwardian, which is not related at all to Queen Anne. What I am saying is that being fixated with a style is constraining your understanding of the period. It's good to give like a big brush, but if we are talking in a more detailed analysis. I don't like using the term style because I prefer telling you look at buildings from the 1740s to the 1760s, or Georgian buildings. I mean, it's we have in England, in UK, the word Georgian to define the architecture from King George the First to King George, not to King George the Fourth. It goes from King George the First to the early years of Victoria, and that includes William the Fourth and Victoria. And it goes to several stages. The architecture of George the First is totally different to George the Second and George the Third, and the so-called and it has even a period on its own, which is Regency. So the moment you start like I said that this is I would say that this talking about the styles is a bit like a Byzantine discussion.
And you explained that eclecticism was the modernist favorite argument. No.
Yeah, eclecticism is a term that obviously eclecticism means like eclectic, varied. Eclectic, even nowadays, I mean, you find the typical indie musician, they say, oh, my references are eclectic. I am find inspiration in Elvis Presley, the Beatles, Marifé de Triana, Lola la del barrio, mariachi, dark Nordic metal. Oh, so eclectic. That's a beautiful music that they do. So, and it's a positive term of you have a director, no? Tarantino has 10 million thousand. It's an eclectic director, no? He does Tarantino stuff, no? Or you would say that others have no, this director or Hitchcock, no? That always had like very particular style, no? You would say that would be the opposite of that, no? Although, for example, there was a Spanish director who in every movie he would put a reference to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That would be either a map hanging in the class, or that would be one of the characters was coming from an aristocratic family there. His name was Berlanga. So that would be always a reference to that way because he liked it. So, but eclectic means varied. But the modernists put it that word as no, all this is eclectic. I cannot understand it. It's too much noise. And here is the word noise, no? Because we have always to remember that the person who put a hate on that was Le Corbusier, mostly Le Corbusier. The others would dismiss eclectic architectures out of fashion, but wouldn't hate it. So you have always to bear in mind that, and the reasons why Le Corbusier hated all that, and his mental autistic problems and the problems that, I mean, God bless autistic people. I don't want to criticize them, but all the problems that autistic people have with ornamentation and with busyness in the in decoration. So we have to bear that in mind, no? That the term was created in a very pejorative term by someone who was already against that. While the rest, neither Mies van der Rohe, Gropius, probably a bit more activist. Mies van der Rohe would never or write. He would use it for himself, but he wouldn't have the hatred associated to it. So eclectic, I don't like using the term eclectic at all because it's like saying a architectural style, no? Or this building is of a certain style. Isn't telling you anything. Eclectic because and the thing is that the modern it was they were combining everything, they were adding Gothic details and then classical, etc. I dare you to show me examples of that said eclecticism. No, they don't exist. They may be some, but that's the problem I was telling you. Some people would call eclecticism what in right terms, if we want to be properly stylish, would be Second Empire style. The problem is that the modernists followed a very 19th century thing. I mean, I always say that the problems of the modernism come from 19th century. 19th century, the philosophy of 19th century, especially in art, etc., is that at some point they saw themselves that they were not within history, that they were not part of the cycle of history, that they were observers of history, that they were above history. And that make them in 19th century say, oh, if you're above history, that means that you are not part of history. And if you see, I mean, whenever you check one of these books about the styles, if you put, I mean, one page for Roman, one page for Greek, no mention to Hellenistic, you see Miletus, you see Celsus, leave it, you see the Forum of Jerash, you see the Basilica of Leptis Magna, you Roman, whatever. Then you have like Paleo-Christian. Okay, fine, Paleo-Christian. But then what happens? Because the architecture of 7th century Rome is different to 7th century Spain, different to the 7th century France. How are we calling pre-Romanesque? Yeah, but that's like cul-de-sac that brings 500 years of architecture. Then you have Romanesque, and then you have Gothic, and then you have Islamic. Islamic. We had like 3 weeks ago, we have Sohaib, who gave us a wonderful lecture about Islamic architecture in Pakistan, which is completely different to Islamic architecture in Spain. Despite having common links. You see what I mean? I mean, talk about styles is good to put a framework, but once you go more than that, you're just entering into the game of modernism. Especially if you call the eclectic buildings eclectic, you are just entering into the game. Name them as name of whichever of imperial Brazil, Republican Brazil, architecture of I mean, in Mexico, you have a good period to define what is eclectic, which is the Porfiriato. It's easy, no? Architecture of the Porfiriato period. That's much better than say eclectic architecture, and it says the same, no? It brings a better historical background, no? It's more neutral. Obviously, it has the consequences of the dictatorship of Porfirio, but it's that.
And
But in the States, you have rather than eclecticism, I like the term, now it's very fashionable due to the TV series, Gilded Age architecture.
And this has to do with the question I send you on WhatsApp
Yep.
about a very common argument from lay people who criticize modernism that it's all the same.
Like
But
modernism is all the same. You mean, or the other way around?
but I've been reflecting on this.
Yeah, tell me. Yeah.
And in a way, all houses of the same style are the same in the sense, aren't they?
Yes, you have. But the thing is that, for example, I mean, I was the other day discussing with one of your colleagues about something that in Brazil you are very now, ooh, you are super fond of, which is the art and craft style. And okay, you say, okay, fine, it's beautiful. But starting with what you are fascinated with art and craft, what you are calling in Brazil art and craft style, it was a video that was shared. And it was a discussion with the person who shared it. He didn't create it, but I said, look, I mean, sorry. I mean, we are in Instagram. I will tell you that that is a very West Coast version of the art and craft. No one in England would call that art and craft. They would call it American architecture straight away. They wouldn't, or American art and craft in the best case scenario. So yes, there are certain similarities to scale, and in a general debate, you need to use the word style, and you need to say, okay, these houses are in traditional style of this state of Brazil, or traditional Portuguese style, or traditional West American art and craft style. I think, but you need to be descriptive and detailed on the way you are mentioning it in a lay debate. Yeah, it's true. There is similar style. A style has a set of similar characteristics, but if you treat that characteristic as a bucket list, boom, 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 then you are doing a weak favor to yourself. Because imagine that you say, okay, art and craft. You say art and craft style, especially the art and craft. That the definition is that you don't have a definition. So it has to be artisan, but That's it. And the problem is that on top of that, the architect that neo art and craft is not artisanal at all. It's completely made out of standardized elements. I mean, the other day I was speaking actually with one of my students at the academy. We were speaking about architecture in San Diego and about all the neo-traditional esque architecture in San Diego and how there were a lot of. You remember when we have seen here St. Paul's in Covent Garden, all the little corbels coming out of the cornice. You see that a lot in American architecture. You see a lot in certain parts of art and craft architecture in UK. Is there a formula to design them? No. They were doing it as they thought fit to fit the loads of the buildings, etc. Now you buy them. And when you buy all this stuff, you need to be very careful, otherwise they look bad. Either A, you design everything from scratch, or you get all the elements that you have, and then you have to find a way of combining them and ensuring that they look proportioned and balanced. No, I said the same. It's the difference between when they first built the most of Cordoba, they gathered all the columns. They were having different heights, so they had to cut them to keep all of them the same height. But they decided to cut them through the base to keep, because all the columns have a little neck at the top where the cap before the capital sits. So all the columns in the most of Cordoba have the neck aligned, but then the base is cut at the ground level, and then you have columns that are thicker, columns that are thinner. Then later on, when they had enough resources to carve their own columns, it would be different. But yeah, in a generalistic debate or on a generalistic chat, you need to use the word style to group, yeah, just as a conceptual framing. But you need to be careful on not entering into the trap of saying, oh, is this Art Deco? And I'm saying this because in the times of Art Deco, of all Art Deco times, the 1920s, 1930s, Le Corbusier architecture was included within the Art Deco. It was his own efforts to be out of the Art Deco that of what was considered Art Deco. It wasn't put the name yet to be out of that, because I mean there is a debate in 1928 in the RIBA, in the Royal Institute of British Architects in London, where all of them are called modernist. And Lutyens is called a modernist because for them it was what it was being done at the time. So that's what I mean, that when you see things from the contemporary perspective of the perspective of a specific time, they were not aware that they were doing a style. For them they were all modernist. Or for example, in Spain, in the early years of 20th century, the director of the School of Madrid was complaining that the students were copying the modern forms coming from Paris. And those modern forms coming from Paris were two, were the Beaux-Arts and the Art Nouveau. So you have to, that's what I mean, that you have to be careful in how to define and when to use the word style or not. Now, if you're telling me that a client comes to your studio, you need to give them an idea, and obviously you need to say, you need to put a name to the style, but that obviously has a series of implications. I generally don't like using very specific terms from a style. I mean, the ones I normally use is classical, when it has to be like properly Baroque and neoclassical, um, modern, when it is going to be like more Art Deco or properly minimalist, and transitional, which is in between. I use the word traditional when I am meaning more country, art and craft, rustic. Those four terms, you don't need more. Because unless the client comes with a very, very specific request, and then you just frame them and help them to understand what they're looking for. Because I get a lot of clients who come tell me, I want a Great Gatsby house. Help me. What's a Great Gatsby house? And I'm saying this because The Great Gatsby house is inspired in a neo-Gothic building, neo-Gothic chateau in Newport, and people have in mind Art Deco. And you know, an Art Deco, yeah, what's Art Deco? I mean, the proper American French Art Deco, but that's a bit the problem with the style, that they can be an easy trap. And in a debate with modernists, I wouldn't enter in which style is valid, which style is not valid. It's like you don't enter into a discussion on details on which style is or isn't. That would be my advice, because it's a word that is a semantic word that you have already lost. Because it's not it's the because they set that the modernist framework is the framework that set the distinction between styles. So and the modernist framework is like either you are with me or you're against me. Doesn't matter that you explain them that this style is not actually art and craft, is the style typical of that put its roots in the typical Brazilian architecture of this state that is super sustainable. They don't care. So don't waste your time on trying to be super specific with the style. Use them for a framework, for a general chat, but they put more limits to your mind than they help. The conceptualization of the obviously we need to talk and we need to use the term styles, but only in a very, very, very generalistic context where imagine you are in a car and we go through, well, we're in a plane, no? We're going from Sao Paulo to Bogota and we pass about Brasilia. And you ask me, oh, what style is that? I will tell you modern. Let's keep going. That's my, or then we see the Lina Dobardi Museum of Sao Paulo, modern. But then we go to this beautiful Palacio de Ipanema, I think it is. Well, I would call it neoclassical, 19th century. Would never call that eclectic, and the modernists do, but that's not eclectic. I think it's not the style, it's more the word eclectic, that I know that in Brazil you use it, you people use it a lot, and that's the problem. That is confusing because it's too many things at the same time.
Can I actually comment?
Sure, of course, yeah. Yeah, it's for everyone to comment. Lonely.
Yes. Yes. My name is Umama. Obviously, I'm from Jordan.
Yes.
Yes. Just to give you a little bit about myself.
Pleased to meet you. Is the first time you're here?
Yes. I think the term style is. I actually joined 2 times ago.
Okay.
On Zoom. Yeah.
Yes.
But yes, I didn't watch all the lectures on Zoom. I completed them on YouTube actually because I didn't want to miss them.
I'm happy to see that people are totally watching them.
Yes, I think I'm the only Arab person actually.
Yeah, probably you are, and thank you very much for doing so.
Me too.
Because even in the Arab community, I'm not finding much people interested actually in real knowledge of classical architecture.
And it's a shame because the Arab world, the early Muslim architecture,
yes,
it was late antiquity. I mean, when you see all
actually not only Islamic. I mean, in Jordan, we're talking about Petra, we're talking about Roman theaters, we're talking about great periods of architectural monuments and cities, actually.
Do you live in Amman? In the capital?
I'm living in Irbid, which is in the north of Jordan.
Have you been in the capital?
In Irbid, people use basalt stone, actually.
Okay. No, I mean, I know because it's already to my mind. For example, the citadel of Amman, that's totally late antiquity. Yes. It's fully Islamic.
Yes.
But it's all late antiquity. It's not that they put much later on because it's the first Umayyads. It's not even Abbasids. The Abbasids are the first ones in bringing a proper Muslim.
Yes, there are actually many cultural interactions actually.
Yeah. I mean,
even in the vernacular architecture.
I'm oversimplifying, But it's very interesting that I mean I am obviously being Spanish and being a lover of the Mosque of Cordoba and Alcazar of Sevilla, Medina Sahara. It is very interesting to see how
Yes.
all the things that were first tried by the Umayyads when they conquer the Levant, Jordania, Syria, Palestine, and they start using the architecture
Mm.
that they have there, which was late antiquity architecture. When they go to Rusafa and they build the mosque of Rusafa that has starting to have all the tripartite divisions, when they convert the Cathedral of Damascus into a mosque, when they build the palaces in the desert in Jordania, the Citadel of Amman. It's very interesting how they, because you can, it's obviously Islamic because it starts to be distinctively Islamic, but every composition technique, all that is late antiquity. I mean, that's why I have a professor in Spain, Rafael Manzano, who claims that in architectural terms, late antiquity lasts up to the 10th, even 11th century in
Yes.
Islamic Spain, lasts until the 10th century in Central Europe, in curiously enough, until 8th century in the Levant after the Abbasids, the paradigm changes. Same time in Byzantine Empire after the iconoclast quarrel. But it's very interesting. When you go to the Mosque of Kairouan in Tunisia, you get that flavor of late antiquity. But
Yes, actually, I totally agree. In in Levant, especially, there is something very common in the Levant countries. It's not exactly specific to each country by the modern means of countries. It's actually a regional
yeah,
concept.
that
Yes, exactly. But I firstly actually wanted to comment on the word style. It's very vague word actually to describe any form of architecture,
correct.
to just describe the style of it. It's very general, and I actually, when I get into a conversation with anyone with architecture and they describe something with style, I already can judge how shallow this conversation can be.
That's that's thank you very much. That's actually what they wanted to what they was trying as well to say that the word style narrows your mind and your conversation a lot. You cannot talk about style. You can talk, but yeah, you have clearly said you are narrowing the conversation and shallowing the conversation a lot.
Exactly, exactly. We can talk about architectural references, we can talk about elements and etc. But talking just about general styles doesn't really take us any deep place when talking about architecture.
No, 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 it
It
doesn't. It
because
doesn't.
architecture is not a fashion to just describe a style.
But even if we talk about fashion itself, fashion changes gradually. It's not that one day
Yes, exactly.
um, you wake up and everything has changed. That happens only to the people who are the last in assuming a trend is when they realize that the trend has changed. But for example, I mean, we are living now in the past 2 years, we're living in a change of trend. We have been, and it's something as easy and stupid as the skinny jeans. No, people have been wearing skinny jeans since the mid 2000s. All the 2010s have been skinny jeans, and only after the lockdowns, people started to wear a bit more ample trousers. Now seems that is the only thing that exists. But for many years, there has been like a transition
Yes, exactly.
in that, and that's a very simple standard fashion item. But it can be the same. I mean, if you see, when you see, for example, the year by year evolution of fashion, you see that there is a clear line, and then you see how which elements they keep, which elements they say, especially when you see haute couture from the late 19th century to early 20th century. You can see how some elements stay for some years, and then they keep changing until they are unrecognizable, and then they keep filling the old pattern, etc. So that's what you cannot call about you cannot tell about the style if you want to have an in-depth element. I mean, It will just narrow your mind, and you will just be contradicting yourself and deeping yourself more and more into um into moving sands. You know that there is now, or very soon, a conference, an inbound conference in Qatar. Were you aware of that, Umama? There is a lot of people going there.
Yes, sir. I didn't hear the last part.
There is a conference in Qatar. I think it's in 2 months' time about traditional architecture, and there was
Yes.
another one in December as well about traditional architecture, because in the
Mm.
Persian Gulf there are two countries that are doing quite a big effort to preserve the architecture,
Mm.
and those are Qatar and Bahrain. Dubai has been doing quite a lot recently.
Yes, I have actually noticed that.
Yeah, especially Bahrain.
I actually have quite an aggressive comment regarding this.
Sorry?
Yes. Um, it's actually sad how only Gulf countries, it's actually kind of sad
Uh-huh.
how only Gulf countries actually in the Arab world can do this kind of initiatives.
It is especially
Because
considering that,
it's not because I live in the Levantine, but it's obviously,
yeah, and it's a shame because I mean, in the sense, especially if we compare
yes,
Qatar and Bahrain with Jordan. Why? Because Qatar and Bahrain, unfortunately, I love Qatar, I love Bahrain, I have a lot of Qatari friends, but the heritage of Qatar and Bahrain is very little. It's a couple of houses and a couple of fortresses and a couple of towers. That's it. And now they are defending that, same as
yes,
Bahrain,
exactly.
same as Cuba, as Dubai. Dubai has done quite a lot of effort recently into the old heritage quarter, restoring the house of perfume, etc. It's been quite good to restore what was back then the royal palace. So
They are
very
actually having, they're actually doing great effort, but they have on like physical grounds, they have very little monuments that
that's
are
it. That's what I was
that we
saying.
can call traditional, if we
Correct.
may.
It's very little.
But I think Levantine and North Africa are way more rich
Of
in
course.
traditional and classical architecture than Gulf countries. Yes.
Yes, totally.
Also, Iraq. Iraq has a very sad state
Yeah, no,
in
Iraq,
this.
Iraq
Yes, it's
is a bit
actually such a shame because Iraq is probably the most rich country in the region.
well, I think, yeah, the thing is that I think that probably, yeah, but Jordan was very prosperous in antiquity. Jordan, Palestine, Syria, all the Levant basically. Well, and it was super
Yes,
fertile, so that's why you had so much
yes,
population, so many cities, so many, and then for example, when you check the expansion of Christianity,
yes,
whenever there was a
definitely.
council, there were coming from the west 10 bishops, coming from the east 40 bishops, or 200 bishops, because every city was important enough to have a cathedral. So you have all that. You have
Yes,
Petra, you
definitely.
have
Yes.
what's Palmyra, you have, is Baalbek is still in Jordan, or is it the Lebanon? But I don't know. It's in between. You have Baalbek, you have all the palaces. Just to say Jordan.
Sorry?
No, I'm talking about the heritage that you have in Jordan, the incredible heritage that you have
Yes.
there, and it's a shame that it is not protected at all. I think it's also it's lack of knowledge. It's
Uh, I, I it's actually connected to the apartheid system, I
uh-huh,
think.
to the government.
Yes,
It has. There is also a relationship with that because
yes, definitely,
there,
definitely.
there are some issues with the political parties and the way the countries are ruled. The and in
Definitely one of the greatest issues, actually, political and regulatory issues. Yes.
Yeah, no. I mean, I have friends from Jordan and they complain about the same. I mean, I think that probably the advantage between brackets is that Dubai, Qatar, Bahrain are very small compared with Jordan, with Syria, with of course
Yes,
Egypt, and obviously it's very easy, and they are very tightly controlled. So that means that it's very easy for them to, if they want to, or let's say
yes,
now that they want to protect the heritage because it's a small island. You can very easily protect the few things that you have. Same in Dubai, same in Qatar. But that's if you go to Jordan, it's a big country. You go to Syria, it's a big country.
yes,
Not to mention the political situation in Syria anymore.
definitely, yes,
Or and then also you have like religious interests as well. No, you know that in Saudi Arabia, a lot of pre-Islamic sites they are neglected, and even early Islamic sites have
yes,
been
definitely,
neglected. No, in order to make all this infrastructure for pilgrimage to Mecca, they have destroyed a lot of early Islamic sites in order to give a space for pilgrimage routes, etc. So
yes,
that happens. In Turkey, there is a general, or there is a veiled, let's say, a veiled disdain for everything pre-Ottoman. So meaning that they would be keen on excavating Ottoman stuff, but
yes, definitely,
they would be
yes. There are
reluctant.
some political dimensions that are very important.
There would be some reluctance in in researching too much Byzantine stuff. In Egypt, it's different because you can. It's the cultural power of proper Egyptian antiquities. You cannot deny it. It's impossible to deny in the moment that the ancient Egypt was so rich that still nowadays you move a little bit of earth and you keep getting 10 million papyrus or things like that. So I mean, I'm exaggerating, but you still find a lot of stuff that is very difficult to hide. But then yeah, you have, or not to mention many or Israel as
I
well.
think in Egypt they give too much attention to ancient Egypt that they neglect other
On the contrary,
civilizations.
unlike Turkey, for example, no, that's interesting. Or for example, in Israel, the tendency is to not to pay attention to anything.
Yes,
Literally,
yes,
we are
exactly.
1948. We were founded in 1948. Anything pre 1948, we are not interested in.
Yes, exactly.
Even proper Jewish stuff is neglected. So it's interesting as well how every country has that sort of interest. And actually, now that you're mentioning, it's true. I have read articles saying that Egypt is neglecting the Mamluk
Yes, yes, exactly.
in detriment of studying too much the Egyptian stuff, especially when you go to places where there must have been like a Mamluk settlement or a Mamluk thing over an Egyptian, and then boom, on the map, all the Mamluk and Islamic stuff is wipe off. And we need to we cannot do another Troy basically. We need to everything needs should be kept as a testimony of the lagering. So that's a bit the problem. But I have read that specifically to Egypt that that the importance, the extreme importance, and that if they are researching cemetery, which is super common, and then they start finding Arab tombs. Oh, these are Arab tombs or these are Islamic tombs. Let's keep digging. Oh, this is Christian tomb, interesting. Let's keep digging. Let's find the ancient Egypt one. So that's what they are interested. No, they go to
Yes, exactly.
they
Because they focus on it for
sorry, they focus
they're
on.
interested in what makes an income and tourism.
Yeah,
Other monuments are neglected.
yeah,
They focus on monuments, yes,
yeah, yeah,
which gives them tourism
yeah, yeah.
power.
It's no, it's quite
Mm.
interesting and quite a disgrace. I mean I don't think I have seen you in because I was doing a lecture of introduction to Islamic architecture, and I did the last one actually last week, last Wednesday when I am not doing them. I am not doing them for a while because I've been doing them every month for a couple of years. So I'm going to change a bit the repertoire, but probably I will give it here later on when we finish the whole program.
Yes. I couldn't do it because I had Spanish language
Okay.
lesson actually.
Okay, well, I will do it in Spanish next
Yes,
time.
because I'm planning to come to Barcelona soon.
Oh, nice, 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 nice. Barcelona is wonderful.
Yes, for PhD.
Oh, wow. What are you going to study, if I may
Yes.
ask?
Um, in my master's I studied adaptively reusing architecture in urban contexts.
Uh-huh.
That's what I did in my master's. So in my PhD, I'm trying to find my way to answer how can we implement traditional architecture, traditional materials, or building methods in Levantine area. Not exactly sure how I'm going to do that, but that's the topic I'm trying to answer. Identity regarding questions for architectural identity in the Levant.
Oh, that's very
I want
interesting.
to dig in that in my PhD, but I'm not exactly sure about what research questions I have in mind.
I mean, I'm asking because maybe, that's my opinion. Maybe Barcelona is not the best place to go and study that. Maybe it's Granada or Sevilla,
Okay,
best places to study that, or Madrid, one of those three ones. But Barcelona,
okay,
I'm saying that because in Barcelona there might be you can learn what you are searching for, but you will learn it in a
okay.
context which will be extremely focused on their regional characteristics. I mean,
Yes.
if you go to
Mm,
Andalusia, it will be very focused on Andalusian characteristics. But because of the heavy Arab heritage that we have in Andalusia,
mm.
we'll find more connections than what you will find in Barcelona.
Oh, okay. I'm actually not exactly like I don't exactly want Barcelona in specific. I was just
Oh, yeah, no.
exploring universities.
Barcelona is
I
the
don't
best
know
place
where to
to
go.
Spain for the first time.
Yeah, okay.
That's for sure.
But
But then, I mean, I will be
yeah, but
happy to try to
yes.
help you as much as you can. Are you aware of the website ArchNet?
No, not really.
I'm going to write it in the chat. If you
Okay.
haven't, and this is for everyone, you will love it.
But would you suggest specific universities for the interest I am interested in?
I would say, I mean, the University of Sevilla, the University of Granada, or the University of the
Okay.
Polytechnic University of Madrid. That would be my three suggestions.
Mm,
Then,
okay.
if you
Thank you.
fall in love with Barcelona, go there. You will learn a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's interesting in the sense that you learn in a completely different context without having to look with analogies with
Mm,
the Levantine world. It's like more regional context.
yes.
And I am checking now the chat, and I'm seeing that exactly an hour ago, Volker wrote, "Is this just me, or does the Harold Washington Library and the main volume of Adams Bodleian Library have ever so slight postmodern tendencies?" Yes. No. They are postmodern. They are from the late 80s, early 90s. So they are postmodern. They are living postmodernity. They are not anymore trying to do a wink and a nod and a piece off to the establishment. They are wanting to be proper classical. Correct. It's archnet.org, Fernando. That's it. I recommend it to everyone. It's extremely good to learn about Middle East architecture. They are the best for that. And they have a lot of articles. So I'm saying that because they have a lot of little articles about minimal about interventions, about restoration of heritage in different Middle East countries. And you may also have seen this one, Traditional Domestic Architecture of the Arab Region. It's a very good book as well. You can download half of it from Google Docs. They were very generous in downloading half of it for free. But coming back to your question, Bulk, yes, there is a postmodern dose in there, because again, I mean, coming back to what we were saying about the styles, when we talk about postmodernity, about the style, what is style? It's difficult. If you talk it more as a trend or as something that happened within the late 70s up to the late 90s, and that was done precisely out of the boredom of modern architecture, and it was done out of the dogma, out of the boredom and the tiredness of the dogma of modern architecture by a younger generation who just wanted to piss off their professors. That's how you understand Bofill, that's how you understand Moneo, that's how you understand Moore, etc. Out of that, a lot of architects refined their architecture, and then they became more classicist. The Bodleian library actually it's by the time that Adam was properly adopting a classical language. There must be odd, etc. And this is something that I always say. You always have to bear in mind the construction process. You also have to bear in mind value engineering. The contractor actually not getting right the detail, the structural engineer not defining it well, etc., etc. There is a lot of details that are not, that the architect is not to blame for. There is a lot of outer forces that make a difference on that. But I hope that after an hour, I hope that Bulk is still here. If not, he will. Yeah, you're here. If not, you will see it in the video. But yes, sorry. I mean, I have just seen it now and saying. I think that it was not. Yeah, it was like an hour ago. Okay. And you are asking as well, how did they figure out the reconstruction of the Celsius library facade? They did because they had enough elements around there and enough amount of ruins to reconstruct it. And this is something interesting because in classical language, if you keep a portion of the base, a portion of the column, or a portion of the capital, or a portion of the cornice, as far as you keep a portion big enough to understand the sequence of moldings, you can identify the whole order. And I think that in the case of Celsius, let's go back. If we go back to the library of Celsius, you can see that there is a lot of elements that were already there. So we are not talking about 3 pieces of stone. We are talking about almost complete shafts, the whole capitals, the whole big portion of entablature. You had a lot of elements. And maybe you don't have the ashlars. These ashlars are modern. But because you have all the columns, you can completely rebuild the whole thing. I think that as far as I remember, the library of Celsius was collapsed after an earthquake, and that just was kept as rubble at the back. No, you see here the back of the library. So the library felt inwards. So because it didn't affect the street, it was just retained there. You have also to consider the problem of urban shrinking in classical antiquity, in late antiquity. So the cities were shrinking, and building demolished was more a blessing than than um, than a course. I mean, I'm sorry.
I was also like thinking, it's quite a unique design. I'm actually quite impressed by it. And they did this only in the 70s.
The restoration.
Yeah, but did these guys in Renaissance Italy, you know, the guys who were making treatises, did they know that you could, let's say, hop the portico the way it's being done here?
No,
they didn't.
I mean, they knew. You have examples of that in Hinojosa de la Sierra in Spain. You have a facade, no, Hinojosa del Duque. You have a facade that does something very similar to this, but that came out as an idea. People, the architects in the Renaissance, they only knew the Greek ruins. The Roman ruins, the Italian Roman ruins.
Sure.
That's the only thing they knew. They couldn't travel because the whole Levant was Ottoman. They couldn't travel. And they didn't know because and also if even if they could have traveled, a lot of elements would be in complete ruins.
Yeah, and they just had Vitruvius.
And they just had Vitruvius.
Yeah.
So you had only a book without illustration that was heavily reliant on illustrations, and a lot of monuments that were built after the book was written, and not always follow the rules told in the book. So, but this was completely alien to them. They didn't. It was completely unknown to the people in the Renaissance. This architecture. This is what it is called Hellenistic architecture. It's way far from the mostly imperial Roman architecture that they were used to, which was monumental, strict, serious, because it was also trying to link with the Republican architecture. The closest thing to this that they could have had is the septisodium that I showed at the beginning.
Yeah, but I'm like trying to think of the implication it would have had if they did have it, because obviously it's a bit more playful, I think, than what they had in as an example.
They started to have this playfulness. I'm going to find the reference that I was talking about. I'm going to yeah. I'm going to share it in the chat. So this is the church of St. Peter in Hinojosa del Duque. You see a similar thing, but not exactly the same, but very similar. So,
okay, very nice.
If you excuse me, I'm going to stop the recording for a moment because I need to excuse myself. So, any more questions? No more questions? I'm going to take a look at the chat to ensure that I have taken a lot of them. I think that, yeah, Barry, we have answered the question. Perfect. Okay.
Hi, Paulo.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, how are you? Thank you so much for a great presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Hello.
Hello. So yeah, I only want to do like a quick mention of something that I found quite interesting. It was the Alberti facade example. Las volutas, creo que le llamas.
Scrolls.
I don't know how to call them in English. It's just like a nice example of an element that I've seen recurring a lot of in Mexico. And even I think you did the mention of how they took the liberties in Mexico to innovate, and that element
Yes.
yeah, because I've seen them, and there are some examples of liberties that they took with that element, and they're like exaggerated, and they're like super robust, and very nice examples of liberties that they took, to sort of like detach from some roots, which is like something that happened in Italy, where I didn't know that it was Alberti then who sort of like came up with this voluta.
Correct. It's more modillon. The right word in Spanish would be modillon.
Modillon.
Modillon. That's the, and in English, scroll.
Roll?
Scroll, rollo. Scroll.
Ah, okay, okay. Which I think it does have like a structural reason,
In
right?
some cases, it has a structural reason. Obviously, in this, there is a compositional
Yeah,
reason to connect both parts, but it's also a structural reason to stabilize the facade.
yeah,
Think about this. I mean, if you only have a very long facade and then you have the only one element on top, this is a bit flimsy. It can
yeah,
move. You are putting the
yeah,
scroll,
exactly.
it moves less.
Yeah, exactly. What I found interesting is that there are some examples in Mexican architecture where this element, it's even more robust than the element itself. You know, it's like out of proportion. It's like an element that I really like. Yeah, well, not in this one. Yeah, but
But you have to put
they
in
work a lot.
consideration in Mexico the risk of earthquakes.
Hmm.
So that what
Exactly.
makes elements become more robust
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well. So you have the risk because it's the same thing. I mean, when you go, for example, to Peru, everything looks squat. Why? Because there is also a lot of risk of earthquakes. Or for
Yeah.
example, if you compare the cathedral in Mexico City, it's long and a bit squat. Well, they could have perfectly gone for something much bigger and taller, but it would have made the pillars very flimsy because on top of the risk of earthquakes, you were building on top of the ruins of the Aztec temples. So
Yeah.
what was the best place to build?
Yeah, you have like an already made foundation, and they just took the same stones they rearranged them basically, yeah, and carved a lot from the same. Yeah, it's a lot that they did a lot that in a lot of settlements.
Yeah. In some cases, I mean, it was easy, but in others, I mean, because
Yeah,
of the size of the church. In the case of the Cathedral of Mexico, it was too big, so it was occupying
yeah,
several temples. So it has massive structural problems. There is a very interesting documentary on the Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia about the Cathedral of Mexico called The Curse of the Gods, La Maldición de los Dioses. Very, very interesting to see the massive problems that the cathedral has in terms of foundations.
uh,
Very, very interesting. All the documents
I'll have a look.
of the INA are amazingly good. All of them related to architecture. They are amazingly good. Much better than any National Geographic documentary that you could imagine. Yeah, the ones
I'll
of
have a look.
Aztecs and Teotihuacans and Mayans, they are amazing.
Mm.
And then obviously, I mean, they have a lot of virreinal, viceroyalty period, and the 19th century, etc. But specifically, the ones about the Mayans of the Aztecs are really, really good.
Yeah, I'll have a look at them.
Pablo, I also brought back a project
Yes,
you commented on a few weeks back in case you have some time for a
yes, of
brief
course.
critique.
And we can do that in Spanish if you want.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
It's up to you.
Okay.
We can go to Spanish or we can stay in English.
We can stay in English. It's okay.
Okay.
Okay, let me share the...
You should be able to share the screen. I want to ensure that, yeah, everyone should be able to share the screen now.
Okay, is it being shared?
Oh, wow, has evolved. Nice.
Yes,
Yeah.
I kind of did a few modifications
Mm-hmm.
and a few things stay the same because it's like here we have we're very used to like a dining room, like a formal, and
Uh-huh.
then a family where there is like the TV, and the other one is for guests. So
We have the same.
I also thought a lot about the division, and
Your connection is a bit less.
and and it looked I don't know if it worked, if it brought a little like if it worked, or if I should just keep it like a great hall.
I see.
And
I think that one of the things that I see is that this is the salon. This is the big one to watch the. This is for visit. No, this is the visit. This is the family.
yes,
So this is the kitchen for the family, and this is the outdoor kitchen.
yes, and also that's also another element that we also have in Mexico is like a grill, which also connects to the outside, which is
Okay,
like here, and it can also work to keep the food warm to serve for the dining room.
of course. Yeah, yeah. It both works as a outdoor kitchen and as a catering kitchen.
Hmm. Yes,
Or dirty kitchen. Sometimes some people call it dirty kitchen because you're going to be like barbecue and things that are very heavy to cook indoors. So you better do it outdoors for the air. So I think that one of I mean I quite like the use of the columns how you have divided everything, but there is a little problem when you're using columns and windows. You need to find a way of enclosing everything, and the way you have done might not be the best one. Why? Normally,
okay.
let's start with the facade. Because on one side I quite like how squat the columns that you have shown are, because you see them a lot in many classical architecture in Mexico, but you see that in Spain as well. Very typical to squat them to the maximum. It's very fun to do it. So they're very nice. But normally what you have the columns, and then you have a wall behind. I'm going to you
Oh
have
yes, yes. That the wall here is missing. It should be yes. You're totally right.
Yeah. And then your windows will be like here.
Yes.
So that's my first comment.
Okay.
And that applies for everywhere where you have this one. Obviously, I mean, this is the hatch that hasn't been, so this one should be like this. And then if you want, you could put pilasters, maybe yes, maybe no. That's totally up to you. Here, you
Yes.
need a little bit more of engagement in the sense that you should have something like this. Because you will need also your little portion of wall, then your column,
Okay.
then your portion
Yes.
of wall, your column, and then your little engagement to do this. So you will need something like that. And then obviously you will have your windows behind.
Okay. Yes.
So that's on one side. Now we are coming to this area, and I think that there needs to be a much better entrance to the big salon.
Okay.
I don't know how, because obviously you have a very central element, which is the fireplace,
Hmm.
but this door should be centered within the wall. So this door should be equal to the side, and if you can have a double door, I would sorry, I would try to have a double door, but leave a space to the sides for an architrave, etc. Because also here you have the same problem as in here.
Hmm.
So you need the wall and you need everything. I mean, I think that all that is quite nicely engaged. And also, I see something here in the front facade that you are not detailing here. And I like what you have shown in the facade, but here is completely different, because what you have
Yes.
shown here is like we have a column which is sort of engaged,
Mm.
and then
No
we have the
wall.
portion of wall, and then behind the column we have a portion of wall, and then we will have the window, and then we will have these with the two columns. So you need to, and then this in big would be something like this. So this will be,
Yes.
and this one will be something like this. And then you will have the other one coming to the other side. So that's more like integrating the elements. And also the arch should be both the same height. You shouldn't leave this blank space here. Your arch should be like
The
this.
same as the door. Okay.
Yes, and then you normally put a transom here so that the door is actually this,
Okay.
so that it does this thing. And then on top, you can put like a fun light or something like that. So it will be something like this. And same goes for
Like
here.
this window.
Like that windows, correct. And then this also that will be easier to build, cheaper to build. And then this, if you want, depending on the style that you decide to go for, this can be like clear glass or could be a stained glass, could be something, whatever you want. On that line, I would never use segmented arches, always arches, and I would align this window with this other one, creating like a very tall opening.
Which one? This one with this one, or this one with this one?
Let me delete it. So I would align this window,
Okay.
and I wouldn't do an arch. I would do either A, you do a half round circle for which you don't have a space for, or you do straight.
Okay.
Then this is a very odd element. I don't know how that's going to work. So I think that an alternative could be to design something more proper like a dormer. Maybe you can even go something, oops. You can even go something like this.
Oh, okay,
That
okay.
integrate more in the facade, not just the little circle. Just take more. Don't be afraid of doing that.
Okay. I also wanted to hear your opinion on the garage because it sounded, it looked a little bit forced to get the.
No, I
the
actually like it. I actually like it because the moment you're putting the squat columns, you are making the statement in that you are not going to work by the rules.
Okay.
And therefore, those big arches, they're big, yeah, but the column is a squat. It's fun. So
Okay.
the column is a squat because the arches are too big and they are like compressing the stones. That's what I would say. I don't see a problem on that. I see more problems in the cornice than in the massive arches. Because this cornice, I think at the moment is missing something. It's either we go for a proper cornice with, oh, sorry. No, we go for a proper cornice that does, no, sorry. With the gola, and then a fillet, and then this, and then we go for a proper cornice that does all this, or we go for little brackets to support the cornice. It's either or. And the building can get either because of the style that you are using. It can go both ways. I would feel more tempted to go for the timber brackets than the classical cornice, but you can try both. And this I would say don't go, it's a Tuscan cornice, don't go more complex. Don't complicate yourself much more than that. Okay, let's go back to the plan. So we said that we want to have a nice double door here. And then I guess that this is the coats and this is the toilet.
Here?
this is the toilet for the guest.
Oh yes, coat and toilet.
Because one thing I was going to suggest was to put the door here, but now I'm realizing that no, you would be into the family room, so the door needs to stay there. So the way I think on one side that the toilet is too big, you could get probably along with a size like this, and then you could have your coats all this, and then a portion of wall here, a portion of wall here, and then this is a secret door.
Okay.
And if not, or it is either a secret door or aligned, oh, sorry, or aligned with this door, you have a single door to the codes. Either or, I leave it that up to you.
Okay.
I would say as well that the staircase, be brave with the staircase. The staircase could, I mean, because you are being very generous to live in the spaces, which is great. So you could play around and do like a little bit of an accommodation step, start rotating the staircase a little bit so that it looks something like this. And then, because this is very generous as well, see what happens if you could have like a little bit of a curve here, and then your steps, once you get here, they are starting to do something like this. So just try to make the staircase a little bit more interesting on that sense, because it's something
Okay.
that you're going to see when you, as soon as you get into the house. So it needs to look like some interesting stuff, and just by carving the landing and doing that. Another thing that you could do, because you have the space, you could reduce this window and could consider that the whole landing is carved. You could have a couple of niches either side, or just leave it like that. That could be a nice thing to do. Then coming to the studio and the, let's call the catering kitchen. I find one small problem with the studio here, and is that in order to get to the studio, you need to cross the sala, the star. So I am thinking on the hypothetical case that if you're having the studio, you're receiving a guest, and then you need to cross the whole living room. And if I mean, I'm assuming like a very high establishment, but even if it is a family setting, no, it's like the husband is receiving a guest to talk with them in the studio privately, but then I mean, and then they're going for dinner, but then they're going to cross while all this is going to be in activity, if you know what I mean, preparing the table.
Yes.
So I am wondering if there could be any chance of having the studio here, a door here. So this becomes like an opening, not a door. And then all this is
Okay.
the sala. With the thing that obviously you have the columns and you have non-columns. But then you can put a couple of nips here that then would become the
Separation.
yeah, like I need a couple of nips to visually separate, also to use the ceiling as a separation. So this will be a ceiling, this will be another ceiling, and then you can have here the dining area. If that's too big, you can always have like a wall here, ensuring that this is at least 2.10, to have like extra storage accessible from this kitchen. And then you have again a secret door here to connect you with the kitchen, and then you serve directly to here while you keep all this area separated.
Okay. Yes, I think I was too in love with having these two volumes like at the side of these
The composition works very well in elevation. The composition
Yes.
works very well in elevation. So, but functionally in plan, you have the problem of the studio of having to cross the dining room to go to the studio or the drawing room. You have to cross to go through the drawing room to go
Yes.
to the studio, which is not ideal. You should get to the studio. I would even say that you can even get to the studio from here. From a double door here, you have like a console or something here. You enter here, and then if you want, you can just have another door taking you here, and then you create an enfilade. So that
Okay.
because the other option would be you come from here. So it could be the two options. If you enter from here, that's okay. Then you don't need the two doors. If you enter from here, you need another door because you're not going to go back and then come in. And then if
Okay.
you are like if you're just having guests for a nice gathering, you just come and enter here, and that's it.
Good. Oh no. Okay. Very nice. Thank you, Pablo.
You're very welcome. Now it's looking very interesting and promising.
Thank you.
Are you going to show me the floor above, or is it just this?
No, the floor above is not finished because I wanted to, yeah, to see if there were any comments on this. But it follows mostly like the same.
Is that this you will probably have to follow a line like this or something like that, and the reason is because this is very deep.
Yes.
Enough. I mean, I know that normally they tell you 60 centimeters. I like making all these units 70.
Okay.
Why? Because you might have some appliance and the appliance keep getting bigger, that it's exactly 60. And then if you want to put a door and you want to put a back, those are those are the 10 centimeters, including the worktop.
Okay.
So that especially with the fridges, it happens, no? That everyone wants to know it's massive fridges, and they're tanks. And then what are you going to do with them? You don't want to see them, and but you don't want the the kitchen to be too bulky. So it's a bit the problem. I don't know. It's looking promising. It's looking promising. This is the laundry. This is the staff room. So yeah, you're having a staff. So yeah, you need to ensure that that there is going to be a way that the staff is going to be able to move around the house without disturbing the family too much. So that might mean that the obviously you need. I mean, I don't know if you actually need the door here or if it might be better to enter through the kitchen.
Yes, that was another thing I debated.
I am just thinking you don't want you don't want to see the staff. I mean, I know it's not like very classes, but it is what it is. I mean, and when
Yes.
and the bigger you design the house, that you need to design two houses, one house for you and one house
Upstairs and downstairs.
Okay, you need to your upstairs and downstairs, but also a connection between both. I mean, the bigger the house, the worse. Normally, it has to be a very big house to request that. I mean, if you only have one staff, it's okay. But I think it's good to leave. The problem is that still, I mean, this is more an open question. The staff comes here and then they stay in the kitchen, but then they will need to eventually leave the kitchen and move around the house. So in this case, I think that and considering is a more relaxed environment, this is okay. But because otherwise we would have to open another door here, and
yes,
what would be the point on opening a door, going to the codes? I think that it's enough as it is. So I think that what you need to bear in mind for all the doors, because I see that you're putting them too close, is that you need to consider that you have this is your corner wall. You are going to need to have an architrave around the door, and this architrave has to be minimum 100 mil, and the distance between the architrave has to be minimum 50. mil. And then obviously the door is going to have your thingy, your stop, and you need to leave 10 extra mil between the architrave and the door. So this is 110, this is 150, this is 50. So minimum, once you start putting your door leaf has to be, this distance has to be minimum 160. Minimum. And then obviously assuming that the frame for the door is going to be around 40 centimeters, this distance, 4 centimeters distance is 120. 120, 130, depending on the frame of your door. But bear that in mind. Ideally, you would like to have 100. So it should be 210. If you know what I mean. You should have like your architrave, which is 100, and then another 100 for the architrave, so that the wall breathes. And then your 10 mil for the stop, and then the door. So this distance from wall to door leaf is 210. And the structural opening would be 170. 170 to 170, 175, 180. So this is just for you to consider for the door. So leave a space and also assume that you need to leave at least 75 centimeters of clear opening for the door to pass comfortably. Because what's going to happen here is that you're going to come with your bags from the grocery and you want to cross here. So you want to have a space to move around.
Yes, that's true.
That's what happens when you work in interior design. But you need to do that all that as an architect you just put there as a placeholder, and then you will solve later. For an interior design perspective, it becomes crucial.
Great.
At the end, well done, and I'm looking forward to how it's going to be evolving and moving forward. So
Thank you. Just one question.
Yes.
I also had some debates about having this window here, and this I don't know if it's proportionate enough, or maybe I should put 2 here to match something from the first floor, or what are your thoughts on?
Necessary for a single reason. This you have drawn as a placeholder, but this doesn't look like this. This is going to look slightly skewed and slightly deformed. So you need to have that in mind. So you have drawn these as the 3 of them straight. So that's one question. So that means that whatever you do above is not going to look as it is below because of the deformation of the perspective.
Okay.
Then you could have another size, any size that you want. Now, what is happening here? Are we having a normal bedroom, or is it the master bedroom?
The master bedroom is here, and these are 2 bedrooms.
Okay.
One here and the other here.
Okay.
Bathrooms are here.
Okay. Well, very well thought. So, oh, wow. So we are having, so you enter, so in the first floor, you come here. What's this? Is this like a sitting space above?
No, this is 2 stories. Like,
okay.
This is like a balcony.
Oh, nice.
I mean,
okay, then this doesn't have any sense. If you have this balcony, doesn't make any sense at all.
There is an access from, I don't know if here, from the up of the portico.
Okay.
So it's here.
Okay, so here you will have one balcony here, one balcony here internally. So your thing will be actually this?
Yes, it goes all the way through to here. I'll show you in some other session, but yes, it's
okay. No, I mean, just trying to understand. Anyway, the thing is that you can't, I mean, I wanted to ensure that it was not the master bedroom. So basically you could have, I mean, I think that having the problem is that this window is as wide as you should go, but one thing that you could have is, let's say we have this, and because you have put your lovely squat columns, you could very perfectly create a wider window, support it with two columns. Because this is very wide. I mean, if you want to go for plenty of light, you could have perfectly this, and then a sort of pilaster or anti in here. You could perfectly go for something like this, shall you want to. It work.
Okay.
Well, then,
Thank you.
well, in here it has to stay as and very nice. I mean, this is a balcony with metal railings, no?
Which one?
This one.
Oh no, those are balustrades, but I haven't.
Okay, no. I mean, I am saying this because this is unfortunately a very, very tricky point.
Okay.
I'm sure that in Mexico, I mean, and this is a problem with what you do with balusters and modern regulations. So I'm sure that in Mexico you have the same regulation that we have in Europe, in the UK, and probably in the States, that you can only pass a sphere of 10 centimeters through
Okay.
through the balusters. So that work. The problem of the balusters, of as you know very well, is that they are very slim, but then they have a belly. And then if you consider your sphere this is more than 10, it's not going to be acceptable. If you put your 10 centimeters sphere there, the balusters are going to be touching the bellies.
Okay.
So it's very tricky. So I would recommend if you, and then there are only two options to solve three options to solve the problem. Option A, which is the worst, is that you put your balusters as you wish, and then you put a glass behind. So that's an afterthought. Option 2 is like you put the balusters as you want, but then they are embedded in a parapet. So that might sound good, but it will look very heavy. It might work here, it might work here, but definitely won't work here. And option 3 is do a metal railing. So you could have a mix of option 2 and 3. That's for sure. But because you have the option of doing that here and here, it will work. Here it won't work. So maybe here you have a railing. But you need to bear that in mind because unfortunately, it's very difficult. It's not impossible. It's not impossible, but the balusters with that regulation might look a bit odd because you will need to assume that if this is the 10 centimeter limit, you will need to design a baluster that it will be something like this, and then the belly has to be very little so that it doesn't touch. So it's going to look almost flat. So it's not going to look as proportional, as voluptuous and curvy as the classical ones. That's the problem.
Okay. Thank you, Paulo. Lots to work.
You're very welcome. lots of things to think about.
Yes, definitely.
But yeah, no, that's how all designs evolve.
Yes.
So for the brave ones who have stayed till the end, I think that I'm going to do the usual compilation that I do at the end of every session. A gentle reminder of the beauty and ugliness in architecture. In May, I will be there. More people will be there. We will be showing our CPA students work in there, so please come. The School of Romania, in case you want to learn construction techniques in the Carpathian Mountains, lovely environment and very hardworking summer school. So if you are into that, just go. And the wonderful workshops that Inbel Belgium does, that some of you have been with them and you know them very well, what they do and how much fun you can have in Belgium. So if you want to go again with the Mortier, you will have a lot of fun with timber, but a lot of fun with ironwork a little bit later in August. or even later on in Conks, another vernacular school, like the one that they did last year in Alsace. So feel free to, I think we are past the deadlines, but try to apply if you are still interested. I hope that they will accept you. I think that this year the numbers are very reduced. It's a bit more, it's much smaller group, but you can go to the school in Utrecht, you can go to the summer school in Spain, you can go to the summer school in Norway, the Netherlands, etc., or the one here in UK in Cambridge. So there is a lot of summer schools for you. There is still this deadline for the drawing competition, 5th of May. So please submit your design for the traditional house. Find more information at La Table Ronde. And as I say, follow your local chapter of INBO for much more. Fernando is organizing as well a wonderful event. He has started to share in social media, and I will start publicizing them as well from the next session. So, and of course, a gentle reminder that I also offer a full course on classic planning, 2 courses actually, 2 years, or to learn architectural literacy and classic planning. In case you're interested in knowing more and not just criticizing your projects, please feel free to come and apply. This is what you will see from your screen, because you will learn online how to draw and how to design wonderful neoclassical architecture. And as I said, there will be an online exhibition for everyone, or everyone will be invited. And stay tuned, I will announce it with enough time in advance. It will be a Thursday, not a Saturday, as we normally do. But yeah, our next session is in 2 weeks, and we will be talking about floor pattern and ceilings. So we will move towards interiors, and then your usual critique time. And thank you very much. You have my email here. Please take note of my email if you want to write me. We also have the WhatsApp group, and I think that most of you come either from the WhatsApp group or for social media. But please feel free to write me anything you want in the email.
Thank you very much, Pablo.
Take a look at what Federico has said. You can alternate the baluster as Borromini in San Carlo alle Quattro Fontane. It's an option, but you will need to upgrade the language a lot. So it can work, but obviously you need to be competing with Borromini. This is not a fun. This won't be anymore a fun eclectic. I hate a fun eclectic house, or a fun house in the freestyle, classical freestyle, to become something a bit more thoughtful. But it can work. It can work. Federico is sharing the baluster.
I guess.
It can work. It can work. So I have never dared myself to use them, but I think it's something that it could work. If you design the balusters properly, it's something that it could perfectly work. So thank you, Federico, for sharing them. Federico is a professor in Valencia and does a lot of research on classical architecture.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, everyone, for having been here. We have been for quite a long time. I hope that you have enjoyed. And if you want to repeat, you will have the video uploaded by Alvaro very, very soon. And in the meantime, you can also go back and see our old videos. And then until then, thank you very much. Have a lovely rest of the weekend, a lovely Easter, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pablo.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Thank you, Paulo.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
You too, bye-bye.